Hello and welcome to the 2 Minute Drill. I'm Michael Rockman. That's Bailey Kumar. 1 year later, we are reevaluating our draft grade. So if you saw the video right after the draft, which we'll probably have pop up on the screen here, you can now come and tell us how wrong we are. And we're going to take a look back at it, maybe rub it in our own faces a little bit, see how we're doing, how we're feeling about these rookies after one season of play. Some guys, still have a little bit more game to play. But, overall, most seasons are done. It's time to reflect, and we're excited to do so. Before we get into anything, though, Bailey, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Got a new haircut. I'm feeling good. Excited for the Super Bowl. So let's get into it, Michael.
Looking sharp. Yeah, so first team right on the agenda, Arizona Cardinals. This was a team that went into the draft and quickly it was obvious they wanted to address the defense. They added guys like Walter Nolan, Will Johnson, Jordan Burge, Cody Simon. This is a class filled with defensive players. Very obviously, they felt that they had issues on the defensive side. Some of those issues maybe are resolved in the long term, but the short term, there's a lot of injuries for these rookies. How are you feeling 1 year later for this class that you gave an A initially?
Yeah, I gave an A just because I love that Walter Nolan pick. I was a big fan of Walter Nolan when I was doing him for the 2 minute drill. Will Johnson, obviously, somebody who fell pretty far in the draft. I don't think any of us expected how far he'd fall, and they got solid production out of Johnson. I think he looks like what we expected out of him. Carl's got a good pick there. Nolan, unfortunately, injured. But when he came back, he was flashing a lot. Jordan Burch played a little bit. Cody Simon also started for them. Denzel Burke also started for them. And I mean, this is a pretty good draft for the Cardinals. They got a lot of production out of the rookies. They got some plus starters. What looks like out of Nolan Johnson. So I think pre-draft, I think I nailed it on the head here. So I think pre-draft, I give it an A. Post-draft, I'll give it an A minus, just because we haven't really seen the full Walter Nolan experience yet.
Yeah, I think in terms of assessing what the team need was, it's very obvious that defense was the right call because a lot of these guys came in and were immediately able to find ways to contribute. Even Denzel Burke, who was a later round pick, was able to come in and start a lot of games and get a lot of snaps with this team. For my grade, I think I'm dropping it to a B because there's so much uncertainty still going into year two. I don't think anyone necessarily has established themselves as a surefire stud. I really liked what I saw out of Walter Nolan in the limited time we got to see him, but still, the injuries were piling up for this Cardinals team, and a lot of these guys still have a lot of football left to play, a lot of football that they have to prove they can play, and that's what's going to lower it for me. But I am excited for this team. I do think the Cardinals are building in the right direction. I like the job that they've done getting this roster put together based on adding what has mostly been rookie talent and just trying to win through the draft before they go and start splurging in free agency and trying to add external additions to this team. So it's going to be interesting to see. Obviously, the Cardinals still have a lot of questions up in the air, but I think adding a lot of these pieces to this defense will give them a lot more flexibility and a lot more opportunity to kind of just chase the best value on the board moving forward.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I just think they got so many starters out of here and that have proven they're going to be at least rotational pieces, like with Cody Simon, Denzel Burke, that I'm feeling optimistic about this draft, but I'm a huge Walter Nolan fan, so might be a little biased there.
No, I love Walter Nolan as well. Moving forward, though, to the Atlanta Falcons, a team that also was pretty heavy on their defensive approach. They added guys like Jalen Walker and James Pierce in the first round with a very notable trade that loses their first-round pick for this year. Other guys like Billy Bowman and Jack Nelson added to this team. Xavier Watts has made some contributions. So how are you feeling about the Cardinals draft 1 year later, especially after firing Raheem Morris?
Yeah, unfortunately, they went so defensive heavy in the draft, and they fired the head coach. So obviously, the biggest kind of, I think, retrospective here we can do is about that trade, that future trade for James Pierce, where, I mean, this worked out for the Falcons. I think it was a really risky move. James Pierce, a ton of red flags coming out as a prospect. I think a lot of people thought this was a risky move, but he comes out double-digit sacks as a rookie. And, I mean, the Falcons have the 13th pick in the draft. If James Pierce is in this draft, would you take him 13th overall? Probably. I mean, maybe even higher. So I think at the end of the day, this move worked out for the Falcons. Jalen Walker was awesome. I mean, the Falcons' edge room really carried that defense for a while there. They got a really nice rotation there. So, I mean, with the 2 first-round picks, obviously, you have to fill out the rotation. But, I mean, they nailed both their picks. Xavier Watts was great as a tandem with Jesse Bates. Billy Bowman was starting at nickel. He looked good before he tore his ACL. I mean, this is like 4+ starters with their first 4 picks. I mean, it's pretty good. What were you thinking, Michael?
Yeah, I think this is a very good draft in terms of just the talent that they acquired. I do have some questions about how Pierce is going to translate with the new regime coming in. Obviously, Ulbrich is sticking around, so that's going to help. But I do think Raheem Morris brought a certain defensive system that helped add emphasis to the pass rush, that helped a guy like James Pierce kind of really flourish, especially like with his production. So it wouldn't shock me to see a mild regression where he's more in that 8-7 sack range. But with the potential we've seen, you can't really bash this pick, and I think the trade up was well worth it. I think it worked out well for both sides. I think the Rams are happy to go into this offseason with a mid first round pick now in their treasure chest of capital heading into the draft. But yeah, I mean, this Falcons team was one that it really kind of came down to, can this defense get a lot better to help out what is a loaded offense? And unfortunately, the offense didn't really take the steps, but that's something that isn't really going to be reflected in the draft grade. So for me, I think this is an A. The limited capital makes it a little bit weird, but I think getting guys like Xavier Watts, getting pieces like Jalen Walker and James Pierce, who I think are long-term front seven pieces, I can support this draft, and I think the Falcons did a very nice job of adding talent to this team. Obviously, the guy that made the picks, Fontenot, is no longer in the building, so they're going to have to continue to hit on picks and continue to build up this roster, figure things out with if Michael Penix is going to be the long-term answer at quarterback. But this is a team that I think has a lot of potential to be very talented. It's now just getting those final check marks to kind of come through so that this team can really start hitting the ground running and competing for the division title, the NFC, and potentially the Super Bowl if things really go well with Stefanski. It's a lot still left up in the air, but I do like the draft and the additions that they made through it.
Yeah, in the pre-draft, I gave them a B+. Post-draft, when I look at this, I can't give them anything but an A. I mean, this is like 4 really good starters on their defense. And obviously, with how bad this draft kind of turned out in terms of the talent in 2026 draft, I think looking back on it, I think they made the right move. I don't know if that was just some premonition they have, some really good advanced scouting where they're like, we can trade this pick. We don't really think the next draft's going to be that good. But I mean, I think this is an A despite the regime clearing effect it had on the overall organization.
Yeah, so now moving forward, our first team in the AFC, and that's a team that really kind of disappointed this season. Injuries and just disappointing play added up. The Baltimore Ravens, they went into this draft and they were willing to take a BPA approach, adding guys like Malachi Starks, adding Mike Green on the defensive line, and now adding guys like Emory Jones, Teddy Buchanan. This is an interesting class. This is one that you gave an A, I gave a B+. 1 year later, Bailey, how are you feeling about this class?
I'm feeling a lot worse, than I was pre-draft. Malachi Starks, he started the entire year for the Ravens. He was good. I mean, I think he was a little bit underwhelming, honestly. I thought he was going to be a little bit better, fit a bit nicer into that defense. But the entire Ravens defense, I feel like, was a bit underwhelming because of Mike Green. The entire pass rush from the Baltimore Ravens wasn't that good. They make the midseason trade to get some more edge talent, and that helped them a little bit. But I mean, Mike Green was so disappointing. I mean, he got better a little bit as the season went on, but I can't believe how bad he was. Teddy Buchanan looked pretty good, starting next to Roquan Smith, and then besides that, I mean, they got their kicker, but the rest of the guys didn't really see the field. But I don't know. I went and given this an A. I think after the season evaluation, I'd probably give it a B, just because I still do think Starks is good as the safety, but maybe wasn't a steal as that he was advertised as, and Mike Green looked completely outmatched in the NFL. Kind of the pre-draft weaknesses that he had kind of got exposed in the NFL. I think those kind of rang true more than the pros did, where you're supposed to come in kind of polished and pro ready. Didn't really see that, so I think I had to knock them down a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that Matabike's injury kind of offset a lot of this Ravens defense and what they were hoping would be accomplished. A guy like Green kind of had to take on more responsibility in terms of being like a better run defender and just kind of not having that advantageous defensive lineman to play off of and really capitalize with his speed and overwhelming ability around the corner. So that definitely hurts. But I do think that this Ravens draft is a situation where a lot of people praise the Ravens, right, for how willing they are to go BPA, and they just constantly get like great talent that's on the board, and it works out pretty well for them. But sometimes, it's more important to go best value, but best impact with your draft approach, because a team like the Ravens probably could have used a better cornerback. I know Uzier kind of stepped in and was pretty good as a Band-Aid option for this team, but I think the secondary really had some issues this year. Adding some additional talent off of the edge probably would have helped. I do like the Ravens' approach, and I think they do a great job of trading down, adding more value, adding more dart throws in a draft process where you maybe aren't as certain about the rookies playing out to how you expect them to. So getting more options and guys that you like is going to result in more hits. But I don't know. There's holes on this roster that weren't necessarily hidden heading into this past offseason, that the fact that they neglected those holes and waited to add at those positions is what kind of resulted in the domino effect of the Ravens falling apart. Like the interior offensive line was horrendous heading into this past offseason, and they just kind of rolled it with moving Fatlele inside and rolling with Andrew Voorhees again. I mean, there's so many veteran guards that are usually on the market or early in the draft where you can hit pretty consistently on these guys. And I feel like the Ravens just, it's not that I want them to be taking like guard first overall, but if we looked at this draft and we're saying like they took Grace Abel, this Ravens season is probably like 10 times better. And I know that's like hindsight 20, like is 2020, but Grace Abel was a guy that both of us felt very well about heading into the draft process. And we thought that he was someone that was going to be impactful. It was just about what team was willing to spend a first round pick on interior offensive line. Sometimes you have to make those hard truths and be willing to acknowledge where your team is weak at and find where you're willing to spend that value on, because maybe offensive guard isn't going to be the best player on the board sometimes, but it's a position that you have to have and you have to definitely shore up. And I feel like the Ravens' failure to do that is why I'm a lot lower on this draft class than I would be if, I felt good about their interior offensive line and their cornerback room moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, the Ravens certainly seem like they overrated their roster a bit, right? Because this draft is kind of more of a, let's get some just guys we're super high on. I mean, that's how the Ravens always operate, but they didn't really do the BPA like you said, and like you said, I mean, they needed depth at certain positions, and those positions, I guess, predictably failed them in the regular season, and they missed the playoffs. And looking back at this draft and where they took these guys, they probably could have saved their season if they had a better draft class. So you're right, but I think just from a pure talent standpoint of what they get, I'm still pretty high on this class. But yeah, the overall impact on their season definitely, I think, stems from here. This is where it began.
Yeah, so 1 year later, you gave this class an A. I gave it a B plus. I'm going to drop it just down to a B. I'm not necessarily out on this class. I like a lot of the guys. I think Green's going to eventually figure things out. But I do think that there was some misguided approaches to adding to this roster and shoring up some of the weaknesses that were on the roster that drops it down a little bit for me. I still like the talent and players that they selected. How about yourself?
I already said, but I gave it a B plus. I think I said in my first.
Okay, sorry.
No problem.
Apologies. So yeah, moving forward now to our next team, and it's the Buffalo Bills, a team that had a very interesting draft, one that you were not a fan of back when this initially happened. You gave it a C plus. I gave it a B minus. So I guess you weren't hating on it entirely, but you just had some issues. You called it the definition of insanity, I believe, if the wording was correct there, maybe paraphrasing a bit. But the Buffalo Bills started this draft with Max Hairston, added guys like TJ Sanders and Landon Jackson. 1 year later, they fall short in the playoffs yet again. Bailey, what are your thoughts on this team?
I mean, I hate to say I told you so, but this is like the definition of insanity. They did the exact same thing last year, and they'll probably do the same thing this year. I mean, I think the public pressure is on them too much. I'd be very surprised if they don't upgrade their wide receiver room. But, Maxwell Hairston struggled to stay healthy. When he was healthy, he lost a ton of snaps to Trey White, which is probably kind of best case scenario for Buffalo with how well Trey White played, but still not really what you're looking for out of your first round pick to get outplayed by Trey White, who was, everybody thought he was washed, but, that wasn't that great. TJ Sanders, didn't really play, which is something that, I alluded to in the initial video. They kind of just wasted their second round pick on a guy who wasn't going to play. There's no real clear lane for him to play, and he didn't play. Landon Jackson didn't really do anything. Blew out his knee. Whatever. I mean, I don't know what to say about this draft. Deion Walker was pretty good. He was actually, when I looked it up, he led the Bills in snaps from their defensive tackles. So that was a nice pick. Jackson Hall was a nice pick, a great blocker. And I don't know. Pre-draft, like I said, I gave it a C+. I guess I'm going to give this a C just because TJ Sanders didn't really pop off. Like, I like TJ Sanders, but, I mean, he's just not going to play. Maxwell Hairston should take over the job, a cornerback job eventually, I guess, if they don't extend Trey White. I don't know exactly what the plan is there, but, yeah, I got to knock it down just because it's C. And, I mean, their season, like the Ravens, it might have been better if they took a wide receiver here.
Yeah, so entering this draft, like post draft, I was pretty low on Maxwell Harrison. So it was a situation where I probably knocked them a little bit for that. But, I do love the pick of Deion Walker. And at the time, I liked it. But now seeing it actually play out well and seeing what he can become, I am a little bit higher on that. I think I stick with a B- for my grade because I think there's still some issues with this team. And I think the failure to address some of the other needs on this roster, similar to like I talked about with the Ravens, it came back to haunt them. And so that's a big issue for them and something that they need to change in their approach. Obviously, with the way that the owner talked about Keon Coleman, I think the wide receiver position is definitely one that they're going to address this season. And it's going to be interesting to see if they do that through the draft or through a big trade or what they're going to have in store for the Buffalo Bills. But this is a big offseason. The Chiefs and the Ravens are probably going to be back in the mix. The Bengals could even potentially get back in the mix where a lot of the quarterback talent is going to be very high in the AFC. Josh Allen obviously up there with them, but this Buffalo Bills team really kind of fumbled what was their best opportunity to make it to the Super Bowl. Now they have to get back into the crowded AFC field where everyone's back at full health, back at full strength, and we'll see if they can hit on this offseason to maybe still get through what is going to be a lot more scary of a field.
Yeah, so Michael, what's your post draft grade on this Buffalo Bills 2025 haul?
Yeah, so I'm keeping it at B-. It's just something that I feel like I had my issues with the draft, but seeing some of the other players kind of come up and really perform pretty well, especially Deion Walker, I'm willing to keep it at B- for now. But I don't know. We'll see what happens. Dorian Strong retiring is hurtful, and we'll see what happens. I guess I don't think he's officially retired, but it seems like he's probably on his way out.
He's a killer for sure.
So moving forward now to the Carolina Panthers, they added Tedero McMillan, wide receiver, the star wide receiver for this team, and really number one option for Bryce Young. They then went on the defensive edge spot, and they added Nick Scourton and Princely Uman Mielen. So this was an interesting draft for Carolina, a team that definitely had its issues through the season, but ended up making the playoffs anyway. Bailey, at the time, we were kind of mixed bag on this. I gave it a B. You gave it a B. How are you feeling 1 year later?
Yeah, I think the biggest surprise, at least for my part, is how good Ted looked. Offensive Rookie of the Year. That's great. He looks like a wide receiver one. The Panthers got exactly what they wanted. I know. Actually, I'm not sure about you, but I think we both liked Golden better than Ted. And so this was good for them with the overall pick. They got him, and then Scourton, which is a guy that we both liked. He was good. Like a 5-sack season for him, and on the defensive line where there's nobody that's super elite, and then you got Mitchell Evans who looks like a solid tight end too. Jimmy Horn kind of got an expanded role towards the end of the season, and then Lathan Ransom was a nice third safety. So I mean this Ravens class is actually looking the Panthers class is looking pretty good. I would have to bump it up. So I gave it a B before. I'll give it a B plus now. This is good. This is a good draft for them. I mean, they didn't make the playoffs. I mean, they probably weren't a playoff team, in terms of talent-wise, but this is a good draft, and I expect all these players to do better the next year.
Yeah, I really liked what I saw out of Ted McMillan. It was something that I think I had him higher than Golden, but I'm not absolutely sure. It was pretty close.
Oh, yeah,
it was one of those situations where
yeah.
it was one of those situations where McMillan's production profile, I was like, man, I can't ignore this, I think. But I definitely had Hunter over McMillan, and I think a year later I'm willing to take McMillan as my top guy. This was a good ad, especially in the Panthers offense that needed Bryce Young to work. They needed to add a reliable weapon. Coker looked good, but he had some injury issues, so it was good to have McMillan throughout the year, and I feel like he's established himself as the clear number one for that offense. This is going to be a weird class for me overall because I don't love the rest of the picks in this draft. Scourton and Uman Mielen, I think, are both guys that can be contributors, but I don't necessarily trust them to have solved the Panthers' issues off of the edge. So I think edge remains a very big need for this team. So when you're spending like two pretty high picks on that, it feels a little disappointing to still go into that next offseason thinking that this is a big need. I don't know. It's an interesting situation. I do like Ransom. I think he's a solid safety for them, and I think he can kind of step in and be the long-term answer. But I don't know. It's a class where I really like McMillan, But the rest of the picks, it wouldn't shock me if like we look back at it 5 years down the road and it's like McMillan stuck around and he's still on the team. Everyone else got to like 3-year, 4-year mark and then eventually departed elsewhere or are no longer in the league. So it's an interesting situation, and I still like the class. As long as you're hitting on your premium picks, I think you can stay afloat pretty well in the NFL. But I still have a lot of questions for this Panthers roster, and I feel like the NFC South is going to be a lot better next year. So the Panthers need to have a big offseason.
So yeah, Michael, what's your grade? What grade would you give them on a post-draft grade then?
Yes, so last year I gave it a B. I think this year it's tough. I'm between a B and a B minus. I'll give him a B. I'll be optimistic. I will say it's B because I think McMillan is such a stud that it's still a good draft. I just have questions about Scourton and Umanmielen that I need to see answered heading into this next season, or else I may be a little bit lower when we do our 2 years out hindsight video.
Yeah, we'll see.
So moving forward now. So moving forward now to the Chicago Bears, a team that drafted Colston Loveland with their first selection, a guy who, some would argue was the most impressive rookie, maybe not in the box score, but still looked really great when he got his opportunities. Added to the defense, added guys like Luther Burden and Ozzie Trapillo, who, we have some mixed reviews on. But this was a class that we were a little bit lower on. You gave it a C minus. I gave it a C. 1 year later, are you higher on this class, Bailey?
Yeah, I'm a lot higher on this class. I mean, Colston Loveland pretty much had the rookie season that he needed to have as a 10th overall pick. He looks like one of the top tight ends in the league. Really great playoffs for him. I think they figured out how to use him. Luther Burden also really turned it on late. And now you have this kind of tough decision if you're the Bears where, is DJ Moore going to be on the team next year? I don't know if you really need him. I mean, that team's looking really good. Burden especially was impressive outside. I mean, a lot of his production was from the slot, but they played him outside and he looked good there too. I mean, Trapillo looked okay at left tackle. I mean, Bears fans are pretty high on him, but every time I watch the Bears, there'll be like one play or two plays a game where he just completely messes up his assignment or something, and then he has that injury in the playoffs. He's probably going to miss the 2026 season, which is unfortunate. And then Shamar Turner also tore his ACL. And then I think the big steal when you look at this class is Kyle Monangai. Somebody who, I mean, I liked, but and then when the Bears drafted him, I'm like, I don't really like this pick for the Bears. I would have liked to see them get more change of pace back, but Monangai was great in that split role with Swift, and he somehow managed to learn how to be a third down back. I don't know. When I was watching him at Rutgers, he could not pass block or take catches out of the backfield. He's doing both at a really high level, so I think it's Eric Bieniemy on the Bears running back coach, right? So shout out him for getting him coached up there. So pre-draft, I gave it a C minus. Post-draft, I think give it a B minus. I think this is above average draft for them. I think they took some really good pieces, and that offense looks like it's just going to be unstoppable next year.
Yeah, I think the big thing for me was I thought that Loveland was good. It was just a question of, was it the biggest need for this team? And I think that still rings true because, offensive tackle remains a big issue for this team. And I think that's where we were kind of expecting them to go into this draft, and they ended up avoiding it. Trapillo, obviously the next pick, is who they assume could be the long-term left tackle, but I'm still low on him. I wasn't very wowed with his season. I thought he had some moments of promise, but there's just a lot of limitations for him that I think, based on how Ben Johnson kind of operated in Detroit, where you're building up this offensive line, I don't think you want a guy who is such a weak spot like Trapillo. Still, Colston Loveland outperformed expectations for me. I was kind of expecting him to have a disappointing season from a box score perspective just because of all the weapons that were surrounding him. But he turned in a really good year and was very good down the stretch. I think he's probably one of the top tight ends already in the NFL and could be probably the main target for Caleb Williams moving forward. Luther Burden looked fantastic. I think DJ Moore will probably be sent out of Chicago just so they can get some extra capital and help potentially build up this roster. Maybe they trade him off to add like a veteran lineman, someone that may be on the market. We'll see. But this is a really good draft. And I really liked Kyle Monangai as well. A situation where I expected Swift to be out of Chicago because of his history with Ben Johnson in Detroit. So I was saying, why are we not seeing this team draft an earlier running back? And instead, Swift gets going. Monangai looks great, and they've solved the issue in very limited capital being spent on it. So I'm really impressed with this draft, and it's one that I'm a lot higher on moving forward. Obviously, we saw Caleb take the steps that we needed to see, and adding these really reliable surrounding pieces is probably a big part of that. So I'm excited to see what happens for this team. There's some other guys on this roster that were able to contribute in rotational roles and maybe add some value for a couple years down the road where they get some more development in. 1 year later, I'm a lot higher on this class. I gave it a C at the time. I think I'm willing to bump it up to a B plus. I think Colson Loveland is going to be one of those guys that is competing to be the best player in this draft. Luther Burden looks like a long-term starting piece at wide receiver. Kyle Mongai, I think he's going to be a dependable power back for years to come. So I'm happy with this class, and I feel like when you're hitting on 3 impact players in a draft, you're going to be doing very well. So I was pretty low on Poles heading into the year, and I still have my questions about him as a GM. But this is a very good draft, and I think the Bears are heading in the right direction.
Yeah, King Poles does it again. But the only reason I was kind of lower on the Bears draft is because they did have the first round pick of Loveland, and then they had 3 second round picks, and 2 of them are not that great. So I do question the capital usage a bit there in terms of what they kind of addressed. Like, they did get a tackle, but maybe I would like to see them maybe draft a defensive tackle. Maybe another edge rusher. I guess Shamar Turner, but I don't know. It's something I just don't know the asset allocation there. I do think they have a lot of questions heading into this offseason. The defense is just really bad. Dennis Allen, I don't know where all the praise for him is coming from. I thought he did a pretty bad job, honestly, with the talent on the roster. They need some major fixes here, and with 3 seconds last year, you would hope they had some more building pieces where they wouldn't have so many holes on the roster. So that's why I bumped it down to a B minus.
Yeah, that's very fair, but still looking better 1 year later than the initial grades we gave it. We aren't necessarily the end-all be-all for how these classes are and how they were at the time, but looking back on it with a better grade is definitely a good sign for the Bears class, and hopefully a good sign for Chicago moving forward. And another team moving forward, the Cincinnati Bengals, a team we gave C and C plus grades to last year. Shamar Stewart had an inconsistent rookie year, to put it lightly. Questions about Demetrius Knight. Dylan Fairchild was added to this offensive line, looked pretty solid. This is an interesting draft for Cincinnati, a team that continues to have a lot of the same issues recurring every single year now. What are your thoughts on the Bengals draft 1 year later, and how are you feeling about the Bengals just long term?
Not good to all your questions there. The best player out of this draft in the rookie year was Dylan Fairchild. He looked good as a starting guard. I think he's going to be the starting guard moving forward. So that was a pretty nice pick. But Shamar Stewart didn't really do anything. He had that long holdout. Then he got injured. That's unfortunate. That sucks. And then the rookie linebackers were the 2 worst starters in the league this year with Demetrius Knight and Barrett Carter. That was not good. So when you take 2 picks on linebackers and it's like, oh man, we really need some more linebackers, that's obviously really bad. And then Jalen Rivers started a couple of games. I don't think he was that great, but he started, so I guess they're still pretty high on him and the depth he can add. And pre-draft I gave this a C. I did like Shamar Stewart, and I do really still like the pick at the time, but that lost season I really think is going to hinder his development. He's obviously in a worse spot than he was last year. I would have liked to see him obviously play a lot better than he did. So pre-draft C, post-draft I think I have to give this a D plus. I think I'm gonna knock it down quite a bit just because the only real saving grace from this class is Dylan Fairchild.
Yeah, I'm with you. I like Fairchild. I still have hope for Stewart, but I do think that I'm going to be a lot more aware of guys who are projects landing in situations where you aren't really trusting the development to come through. So really bad landing spot for Shamar Stewart. I would have liked him end up somewhere else, maybe a spot like Arizona where he's working with a guy like Jonathan Gannon and hopefully developing more as an edge rusher and adding some of those traits needed. When he's in Cincinnati, where I kind of question just the overall development and just the overall team structure, a lot of issues pop up. The issues continue when we go into the linebacker room. I think the Bengals have the worst linebackers in all football this year. And part of that is the lack of front 7 play, especially on the defensive line. But Knight and Carter just did not really show anything of promise. They were just kind of out there running around, getting cardio in. There's a lot of questions, and I don't really feel like any position on this Bengals defense is set in stone for the long term. I think cornerbacks need. I think safeties need. I think linebackers need. I think defensive tackle and edge needs. This is a really bad defense, and nothing changed. The draft was pretty defensive heavy, but you aren't feeling better about this defense moving forward. It's really just Dylan Fairchild's a starting guard, so is that good enough to save them? For me, absolutely not. I'm giving this draft probably, I think right now, anything but an F is just like too kind, because this is a horrible draft. You are wasting years of like the most productive passing trio you can ever have. You have Chase Brown, who's like a really good running back, who's like exciting and explosive, at least at like his worst. Is he can still make a lot of splash plays happen out of the backfield, and you just can't do anything about it. So yeah, I mean, Joe Burrow getting injured and having his issues, and there's just stuff that also set back the Bengals. But when you trot out a defense that's like maybe their best games are just like giving up 28, like you're terrible. So the Bengals have done a terrible job. There's nothing you can really say to excuse it. This is a team that's constantly cut corners, went cheap, doesn't hire many scouts. I don't even think their GM is like a real GM. I think he is the GM officially, but like for a while he wasn't, and they were just like, you've been here long enough, we'll give it to you. It's just an organization that constantly has failed its players, and it almost makes me look back on when Carson Palmer was like, Joe Burrow, don't go to the Bengals, like they aren't going to be serious about winning. And a lot of people like kind of scoffed at it, and it's like, whatever, Palmer, like you're just old and hating on the Bengals because they like didn't want you whenever they brought in Dalton or whatever the situation was. But I mean, a lot of it is aging extremely well, because this Bengals team has some of the highest talent we've seen in the league in terms of just like some of their superstars on this roster. And it's just offset by horrendous roster building and terrible players that are starting and playing like big roles on this team. And, you can't really fix that in an off season. So if you're Joe Burrow, you're like, can I potentially get like a low end wild card berth in the 2026-2027 season, and then another good offseason, which we haven't really seen any reason to believe the Bengals will do, to maybe contend in 2027-2028. So I don't know. It's a really bad draft. I have to give it an F right now, and I'm not very optimistic about the Bengals moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really disagree with anything you said. That was brutal, but I mean, you're right. I think the saving grace besides Dylan Fairchild is that I don't think a lot of us had a lot of year one expectations for Shamar Stewart. So I feel like we always knew he was going to be a developmental piece, and so him like doing terrible year one is not the same as kind of like someone like Mike Green doing terrible year one, where he's supposed to be pro ready. We knew it was going to take a while, but I can't disagree with that F grade. And I mean, you're right. Zach Taylor, longest tenured coach in the AFC North now. He's terrible, so we'll probably be here next year lamenting about their draft again.
Unfortunately. So we continue to move forward, and now it's the Cleveland Browns. This is an organization that deserves probably similar bashing, but I do feel a lot better about their draft. So they're going to have a nicer reflection here in this regrade. Obviously, the picks of Mason Graham, Quinshon Judkins, Carson Schwessinger, who's probably going to win Defensive Rookie of the Year, Dylan Gabriel, Harold Fannin, Dylan Sampson, Shador Sanders. Like there's a lot of name value in this class that we got an opportunity to see this season. How are you feeling about this Browns draft 1 year later?
I mean, pre-draft I gave it a D+. And the biggest thing was I did not love the trade back to get Mason Graham. I thought that Travis Hunter was such a transcendent talent, and then somebody who could really turn that organization around, that they should have stayed there and made the pick and get this great two-way star. And they did, and they traded back, which I mean looks worse now that the pick is like 26th overall, 27th overall. I'm not sure the exact one, so that's obviously worse. And then Mason Graham played the entire season. He was okay, but when you're like playing on the same defensive line as Myles Garrett, you should have some more production. I think he had like half a sack, maybe one sack, so that wasn't great. Schlesinger was awesome. Great pick at the time. I always loved Schlesinger. There's nothing to complain there. Judkins and Sampson, they're all right. I know that that Cleveland Browns O-line is pretty bad, so I'm going to give Judkins and Sampson some grace just because of how bad it was. And then Fannin, I think, was the biggest surprise here. Obviously, a great player in college. Not everybody was sure how to translate, but he was dominant. He was such a great tight end. And then you get to the QBs. Gabriel, wasted pick. Shador Sanders also doesn't look that great. One of the worst kind of starting runs we had, but again, bad O-line, no receivers. But I'm gonna let you talk because I want to give some more time to think about my post-draft grade. But I don't know. You go ahead. Tell me what you think, Michael.
Yeah, so I am a lot higher on this class. I think even in hindsight, but I think on draft day I was a lot higher as well. I like Graham. I do have the same questions of, you have to be more impactful when you're playing with such a luxury like Myles Garrett on your defensive line. But I do think he helped set up Myles Garrett for what led to a record-breaking season. So that helps. I love the picks of Schlesinger, and I think Judkins looked really phenomenal in my eyes. The tackle situation in Cleveland has been dire. The offensive line overall was just kind of beaten up this season. So I don't have a lot of issues about him having his struggles, especially when the passing game was just so unproductive for the beginning parts of the season and he was able to flash. The injury sucks, but I'm not going to bash the Browns for, not realizing that their running back was going to break his fibula or something. Like, obviously that doesn't really get reflected in this draft grade. So I'm excited for Judkins moving forward. Fannin looks like a stud. I don't know if he's really like a true tight end, but he's going to find a way to contribute and he's going to find a way to get involved in this offense. He's going to be a spectacular piece for them moving forward. Shador's an interesting situation. I think if this were another draft class where more quarterbacks are on the board that the NFL felt higher about, the Browns would probably be willing to move on and willing to kind of embrace their future with a different player under center. But instead, because of a bad draft class, he's going to become like a Sam Howell where, they're going to bring in a veteran, whether that's Deshaun Watson or someone else that they sign, and they're going to say, hey, like, if you can win this job, we're going to allow you to get the year to prove yourself as the long-term piece. What we saw last year, I'd say right now he's definitely not there, but I do think that there was enough flash, enough big playability, and enough times where the offense opened up to where I'm willing to see out Shador for another season before I'm necessarily casting him off. I liked him enough as a prospect too, and I think it's important that regardless of where he went in the draft, like how I evaluated him is how I should move forward with him as a prospect. So I think the next year is big for him, but it's something that I think is worthwhile for the Browns, especially in a class like this. I gave it a B plus. I think I'm sticking with a B plus. I could be talked into taking it down to a B, but I think the additions that they made to this roster are very promising for the long term outlook for the Cleveland Browns, and I like the guys like Judkins and Schlesinger and Fannin, who I think are high end pieces and good picks for especially the draft slots that they're taking. And so I like this draft for the Browns. I think Andrew Berry did a pretty good job, and Browns still have a lot of work to do, but it's going to be a fun offseason to see if they can continue to build up this roster.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really disagree with you. I think the Judkins evaluation is the only thing we're off. He looked good, but I think my problem with this draft has always been the philosophy behind the draft itself, where you have 5 top 100 picks, right? And then what do you come out with? You come out with the defensive tackle. Well, I'm not a huge Mason Graham guy. He wasn't that great this year. Schlesinger's awesome, but linebacker, that's a low value position. You got 2 running backs. Maybe you got your running back room solved out. Those are still low value positions. Like J.K. Dobbins was giving you more production at like $2 million a year. And obviously Dobbins behind this O line would be a lot worse too. But that's kind of my overall point. Where's the offensive line picks? Where are the wide receiver picks? Where was some edge picks too? Like this corner picks as well. Like the players that you got out of this draft were not high value positions. The Browns have so much work to do. They had to rebuild pretty much their entire offensive line. They need some edge depth behind Myles Garrett. They need some corners too, and they need some wide receivers. I mean, Jared Judy took a step back, and Fannin is cool, but like he's like a move tight end. He kind of put up like a fake 700 yards where he's like, who else are you going to throw to? He had so many targets. I don't think he's going to replicate that target share ever again. And I don't know. I gave it a D plus. I still had a C minus just because I think Schlesinger kind of played to the top of his abilities, and Fannin was obviously a great find, but Mason Graham played about, everybody else played about what I expected him to play out. Gabriel just burned the pick at this point. He's terrible. Shador, I loved him pre-draft, but in the NFL, he looked terrible. I hope he can get better, but he's gonna have to get rid of the ball quicker. He's got to be more mobile in the pocket. There's so much development needed for him. Even though he was a Pro Bowler, apparently Pro Bowl talent, but at the end of the day, this Browns roster, I think they wasted a prime opportunity to rebuild kind of the important pieces of the roster, and the steps from them getting from here to contender is so long and so far. You need probably like so many new positions, and I don't think they did a good enough part in this draft with the capital they had to kind of rebuild and take the steps that they needed to. So I'm gonna have to go to C minus here. I mean, I give it a D plus, I'll give it a C minus, but yeah, overall, I'm still not a fan of this draft or the philosophy behind it. I think the Browns are probably in the worst situation in the NFL, in terms of cap, in terms of players, in terms of everything. They got the Jaguars first round pick this year. Hopefully, they'll take some tackles, some edge rushers, some wide receivers, but overall, I think this draft is going to be, when we look back on it, just a missed opportunity to rebuild.
Next up, we have the Dallas Cowboys, a team that took Tyler Booker in a somewhat surprising first pick of their draft. They also added Donovan Ezraku, who turned in a pretty solid season. Siobhan Revel, Shamar James, Jaden Blue. This is an interesting draft, one that when we looked back on it after the draft, you gave it a B, I gave it a B. 1 year later, how are you feeling about this class?
I mean, I'm feeling pretty much the exact same as I felt, before the draft. I'm still going to give them a B. I think Tyler Booker, like you said, a lot of people were kind of iffy on this pick, but he looked good. I mean, he was as advertised, nasty run game, maybe a little bit middling in pass protection, but I mean, he was great. He was great, and then I think a lot of that has to do with Clayton Adams also with the Cowboys, just of the job he did and how well he did, and then as a Rock was great. I mean, it's pretty big shoes. Trying to fill in the hole left by Micah Parsons, but I thought he looked good. And then Revel got injured and barely played, and the rest of the rookie class didn't do too much to the chagrin of the fantasy community that Jaden Blue didn't kind of pop off like a lot of them wanted to. But I think this is a good draft for the Cowboys. I'm not mad at it at all. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I'm in a similar boat. I liked Booker, but I thought that it was a little early for me in terms of where I evaluate him compared to the rest of the board. And he looked really good for the Cowboys, so I think he's a long-term piece. And, that's always been the Cowboys' philosophy, is kind of building up the offensive line, winning there first. And the offense looked really good. Ezra Aku, I think, showed a lot of good traits. I was a little bit lower on him as well, so I think the fact that he played pretty well, and he didn't necessarily have the box score numbers that a lot of people were wanting out of him, but I think he put up a pretty good season and showed a lot of good reps and traits that I think he will develop into a more a better player next year and then going into the future. I don't know. This is a Cowboys team that I think cornerback was obviously a big need. Revel getting hurt kind of hindered that, but there's a situation here where this team really kind of has to fix their cornerback room going forward. And I think it comes down to Revel on whether or not they answer that at all in this draft. And if not, you're looking at this team and saying, man, was this another missed opportunity? Especially kind of how you talked about the Browns going for low priority positions, was spending a first round pick on an offensive guard, doing that. Booker's obviously a very good player, but was offensive guard worth it when cornerback is such a big need now for this team? And I don't think it's the wrong decision to see how Diggs looks, see how Bland looks, see how Revel looks, and trying to run it with that. But there are some questions for this roster moving forward that I think now are a lot more obvious needs that we could look back on this draft and say, man, there are some missed opportunities here. Maybe a guy like Barron could have been the answer they were looking for at cornerback or something. We'll see what happens, but this is a class that I feel pretty good about, especially at the top. I do like Booker and Ezraku, to where I think how the rest of the class pans out, as long as they get another somewhat contributor, it's going to be looked back on pretty well compared to the others. So I'm sitting with my B grade, and I think I'm sticking there.
Yeah, that's fair. I do wonder at this point if they knew they were going to trade Micah Parsons. I don't know the exact timeline, but I wonder if that was a factor into being man, we're just going to have a billion picks next year. Just take Tyler Booker. We'll figure the rest of this out later. And, they did take Revel to address that corner room. And the corner room on paper looked good. But Revel, obviously, that injury history, maybe predictably got injured again. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair. I think we both had to be pre-draft and post-draft. I think that's fair.
Yeah, not much more to talk about for them. So we're going to move forward to the Denver Broncos, a team that really could have been in the Super Bowl this coming Sunday. This is a team that put together an interesting draft. Some people were lower on it. We were also kind of mixed bag on it. You gave this class a C minus, and I gave it a C. They added Jahdae Barron in the first round. RJ Harvey, Pat Bryant, notable contributors. Quay Robinson had a pretty good play in the AFC Championship. This is an interesting situation for the Broncos now. 1 year later, how are you feeling about this draft?
Yeah, this is kind of a weird draft looking back on it. I mean, the Broncos are just too good of a team, really. At the end of the day, like Johnny Barron, he couldn't play because McMillan just was too good to take off the field, and then RJ Harvey wasn't really playing at the beginning of the year because Dobbins was just too good, and then Dobbins gets injured and he plays, and Harvey still looks like he's a rotational back. I'm not sure if I love that in the second round. Pat Bryant, I think, was a big surprise. I think a lot of people saw it as a little bit of a reach, but he carved out a nice role in that offense. And then Robinson, like you said, didn't play too much. The defense is just too good. Like, who you're going to really play, like who you're going to give up snaps for to get Robinson on the field. He did get that sack on May, which was nice, but I mean, the Broncos are just too really good of a team to evaluate this. I would have liked to see Barron play a little bit more. I think the Broncos linebackers are a little bit middling, so I don't know, maybe they could have taken John Campbell. I don't know if that was before or after their pick, actually. So maybe they didn't even have the opportunity to, but yeah. I think pre-draft C minus, post-draft C minus. I don't think anything has changed my opinion of this draft, and it's kind of hard to evaluate these players because the Broncos are just too good.
Yeah, Campbell was taken, I believe, at 31, if I'm not mistaken.
Eagles
so
took him,
probably,
yeah, for sure.
probably should have been the pick. Just looking at it in hindsight, still really good. I think just team obviously in Denver. So a lot of these guys could very well like become long-term pieces and starters for this roster, but it's really just about finding their way onto the field. The Broncos are also just like a weird team. I don't necessarily feel like they have like an A plus, like even an A tier starter on their like offensive skill group, but it's just a lot of guys who are like pretty good, and then they combine more pretty good pieces, and it's just like, yeah, we just like probably get like 40 yards out of our top contributor each game, but we find ways to kind of produce enough, and then our defense is really good, so it's just like they win 24-13 or something. And that seemed to be like the case for this team. Pat Bryant kind of fit in as like a nice physical pass catcher that can operate in the slot, but he also was getting rotated out a lot because guys like Will Jordan Humphrey were able to contribute. Cortland Sutton and Marvin Williams obviously pretty good as well. So there's just like a lot of talent on this team, and it's not necessarily like superstar talent. It's just like these guys are good enough veterans, so rookies are going to have a hard time trying to earn their keep on this roster and in this lineup. And I think this Broncos draft was good. It's just kind of giving it more time to see how it continues to age. I gave it a C. I think I'm willing to bump it up probably to like a C plus because I didn't necessarily have any issues with the players when they played this year. It's just, can they actually outperform what are already pretty good veterans and earn their keep more in that lineup and get more time on the field. And usually when you're talking about like 1 year later, these rookies like barely played for this team, so it's a bad draft. It wasn't necessarily the case for the Broncos. So it's a very unique situation. That's why I'm not necessarily bumping it up a lot higher, but I give it a C plus because the time we did get to see these rookies, I was pretty impressed with them, and I do trust the group moving forward, especially as they get more involved with the defense and offensive side of the football. So moving forward now to the Detroit Lions, a draft where you gave them a D, I gave them a C plus. Year later, there's definitely some concerns. Tyleik Williams, Tate Ratledge, Isaac Tislaw, Miles Frazier, and some other selections later on in the draft. But Bailey, you're shaking your head already. You have your concerns with this class moving forward. You had them right after the draft. How are you feeling about this class?
I mean, I'm feeling about the same as I felt it before the draft. I mean, Tyleik Williams, I do not know what the hell the Lions were doing. I mean, before the draft, I was kind of questioning the pick, and then when I saw him deployed, I don't understand how you use your first-round pick on that. Tate Ratledge, he was all right. I mean, he was a good serve for them, but the Lions so used to that elite offensive line play. I think that Ratledge was obviously, a step back from what they usually have. And Slaw, look at the highlight reel on this guy. You're like, man, this guy is crazy. Look at the touchdowns, look at these huge catches, but those were all the catches he had. I mean, he wasn't that much of a producer. Miles Frazier saw some action, nothing special, but guard and then nose tackle, and then, backup wide receiver, and you missed the playoffs by like, 2 or 3 games in that division? Oh boy. And I mean, it's not even like you can get hopeful. It's like, oh, maybe like these guys will get better. Like Tate Ratledge getting better doesn't meaningfully really help your team. Tyleik Williams getting better doesn't really meaningfully help your team. You already have DJ Reader there. Like, how much better is these guys going to really, how much better can your team get if these guys play to the top of their abilities? Tasla's the only one I think who, we kind of saw him flash. If you could put that together for a full season, that could be, well worth the 3/3, whatever they gave up for him. But, pre-draft gave it a D, post-draft, I'm still giving it a D. This kind of sucks.
Yeah, it's one that I think post-draft I gave benefit of the doubt to Brad Holmes because it was similar critique for like the Jahmyr Gibbs class where everyone was like, these are like low value positions, so how much does it really impact the team? Then Gibbs is a star. Campbell looked pretty good in the process. There was just a lot of hits in that class where it worked out. This year, they did it again, similar approach where, adding like a nose tackle, adding an offensive guard for a team that probably still had bigger needs on the roster, but they wanted to get their guys to kind of fit into the long-term picture for this team. I like Williams, but Reeder still looks pretty good. They got similar production out of Roy Lopez, who I feel like it was almost like Tyleik Williams was a split nose tackle too. It wasn't even like he was next up after Reeder and he's going to take over after this year. It was like, yeah. Anytime Reeder's left the field, there's a 50-50 chance if Tyleik Williams is actually coming out there. So it was one that I had some questions about, and now I'm a little more concerned. I do think Williams is fine. It's just, there's a lot of issues there in terms of just like the usage. Tasla looked solid as like a splash play guy. I don't really trust him to be a consistent contributor. And the Lions, I feel like, don't run a lot of like 3 receiver sets or rotate in a lot of receivers. So I don't know how much of a role he's going to get. I feel like he's probably going to expand his usage, get some more snaps. But if he's like a 30 reception guy, are you feeling like this is really a pick that paid off when some of the other picks are already kind of disappointing? So I have my questions about this draft. And I think it's another situation where this was a team that was pretty close to being a Super Bowl contender, pretty close to being a team that probably is in play now for potentially making it through this postseason if they had taken the proper steps in the offseason. And I think they squandered their opportunity. So, yeah, I gave it a C+. I think I knock it down to a C, maybe even C-. Looking back, I think the Tyleik Williams pick probably should have been Ursary. If you're going to take like a developmental selection, let him sit behind Decker for a year, especially because it sounds like Decker may even be retiring this year. Let him sit behind Decker as the left tackle too, develop into that role, and then take over to where your offensive line continues to dominate. It would have at least paid off more at a premium position like offensive tackle compared to nose tackle, where, I mean, you just saw it with like Roy Lopez. You can get like pretty good production out of veterans that are cheap on the market. So it's like tough to necessarily think it's worthwhile to invest in a long-term nose tackle of the future when you're not even really letting him be like the second guy up who's rotating in a lot. It's like he's a rotational nose tackle, which isn't worth a first-round pick ever. So I do think Williams will be fine. I think some of these players will end up being like contributors to this team. It's just I question the impact for a draft class that had like a very normal slate of picks. It was like first round pick, second round pick, third round pick. Like if this was a situation where you're picking like third round and you have a lack of capital, then it's a lot more excusable. But right now, this was a very normal draft class in terms of draft picks available to you, and you are really looking at minimal impact from it. So yeah, I've talked myself into a C-, I think, for this draft after regrading, and it's unfortunate because the Lions obviously have a lot of talent and a lot of ability to make progress through the season, but drafts like this are ways you can kind of set back your franchise.
Absolutely, and I don't want this to come off like we hate Tyleik Williams. I think we both were pretty high on him coming out of the draft, and if the Cowboys took him in the late first or somebody took him in the early second, I think he would have been a lot better. But it's just not a useful pick for your first rounder. There's so many other directions you could have gone, and yeah, I mean, next year the Lions are going to have a lot of holes, and I mean these guys aren't really plugging them. So yeah, a bit of an unfortunate draft for the Lions, but this is kind of a low outcome kind of run out for these players, unfortunately.
Yeah. So moving forward now to the Green Bay Packers draft class that was pretty interesting. Matthew Golden with their first round pick, Anthony Belton in the second round, Savion Williams in the third round. There are some other selections as well, but this is a draft class that I think is one of the more intriguing to talk about for a regrade. When we look back on our old grades, you gave it a C minus. I gave it a B plus. I was a lot higher. 1 year later, Bailey, how are you feeling about this draft?
I'm disappointed. This is the only word I have is disappointed. Matthew Golden, loved him as a prospect. I thought he's such a great fit into the Packers, who were kind of looking for, when they coming off that playoff, this kind of disappointing playoffs year before. Why didn't we win? We didn't have that alpha number one wide receiver, and they go out and get it. I love the philosophy behind that, and Golden just didn't play, and it was really disappointing. And then to take Savion Williams with their third pick, that's a waste. I mean, he's never seen the field. That wide receiver room is already crazy kind of crowded, and you just add Savion Williams into it. I don't think that was good at all. That was good when it wasn't good process. And then Anthony Belton, he started some games at right guard in the later half of the year. He was terrible. The entire Packers offensive line was terrible. So I don't know what happened there. And I mean, the guy who I thought flashed the most was probably Sorrell when out of the edge spot, and he was like a fourth or fifth round pick. So I mean, I'm so disappointed in this draft for the Packers. I still have faith for Golden. Maybe he'll get some more snaps and some more targets once Dobbs leaves in the offseason. But, I mean, Belton looks really bad at right guard, but the entire Packers offensive line looked bad. So maybe there's a coaching issue there. But, I mean, I wasn't high on Belton to begin with. So, I mean, pre-draft I gave this a C minus. I think this is still looking like a C minus for different reasons. But, yeah, this is just one of the more disappointing drafts, I think, out of the entire league.
Yeah, I thought Golden looked pretty good, but he just really didn't get on the field. And I think that's something that is almost like a lesson. The NFL loves their veterans. So when a room like the Packers wide receiver room has four guys who are pretty good veterans, but it's just you're looking for that one guy to come through, it's going to be tough for a rookie to do that. And especially a guy like Golden who never really had the production profile of an alpha receiver, and that's what they were going to ask him to become. It's a tough jump. And, guys like Jaden Reed, guys like Christian Watson, Romeo Dobbs, Dontavian Wicks even, they're solid enough NFL players to where a guy who has familiarity with them, an organization that has experience seeing them on the field, they're going to have a lot of that seniority in the wide receiver room to where guys like Golden have a tough time moving up the ranks. And I agree with you. Savion Williams almost feels like he's going to be a running back if he's going to contribute to this team in the future because they used him, I think, even more out of the backfield than they did at receiver this season. So the real question is, can Golden eventually become that wide receiver one? I think with Dobbs leaving, the hole is open for him to step into it. Watson looked pretty good this year, but I don't necessarily trust that production to stick over the course of a full season. Reed dealt with injuries, but I do think he's a pretty good slot guy. Golden's going to have an opportunity, but it's still going to be tough. I mean, Wicks is probably going to stick around, so I think Wicks is still going to get a lot of opportunities for those snaps. And if Golden can't earn them early, we could be looking at a guy who's just kind of stuck in that 600 yards to 800 as best season type of situation. And it's just another guy who kind of repeats the same issue for the Packers where it's oh, yeah, he's fine, but we need a guy to kind of take us over the top. I do trust Golden. I think there's a lot of flash and a lot of ability that he still showcased as a rookie to where I can be sold on him moving forward. But it was definitely a disappointing rookie campaign. I like Belton. I felt like he was a really good tackle for North Carolina State. Seeing him at guard and not succeeding is definitely concerning for me. So I'm intrigued to see whether he's able to step into that left tackle spot because Rasheed Walker is going to be hitting the market. It'll be interesting to see how they kind of shuffle this offensive line around. But I don't know. The Packers draft was another situation where you could tell that they felt pretty good about their roster overall. So it's just trying to add on to those certain positions where they felt like they needed an upgrade or a long-term answer. And none of those guys really came through in year one. But I do think these are guys that are more future heavy, let's see how it plays out a couple years down the road rather than immediate impact players. So I'm still willing to remain optimistic on this class. And I am going to have to drop it, but I think I'm dropping it more to a B minus, and we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, I do think the other thing with the Packers is you have to address kind of the Micah Parsons trade, where now they don't have their first, and now cracks is trying to form on that roster. Not something they obviously didn't plan for when they were making these picks, but that O-line, you're going to need some reshuffling, like you said. Some guys might leave, some guys might get cut. The running backs kind of looking a little bit rough. Josh Jacobs really struggled to stay healthy at the end of the year there. And you're starting to have some more defensive issues, especially the defensive tackles. Your edge rush depth as well wasn't that great. Obviously, with Parsons come back, that should be good, but who knows when he's going to come back? So, yeah, and I mean with Golden too, like you have to remember that Tucker Kraft was dominating a lot of the targets, and then he went down, and you're like, oh, Golden's usage is going to go up. It didn't go up, so it's like, where does he peak out for this roster? And the big joke with the Packers was always they had 5 wide receiver 2s, and then they're like, all right, enough. We're gonna get a wide receiver 1. And it's like now you have 6 wide receiver 2s, so it's like it's not, I don't want to call it a wasted pick, but I think if they could go back and change the pick, they definitely would, which is why I have to go give the grade a C minus.
That's very fair. Moving forward now to the Houston Texans, and they were a team that didn't have a first-round draft pick. They still added Ariante Ursary, Jaden Higgins, Jalen Smith, Jalen Knoll. Woody Marks was pretty good this season in terms of just added contribution. Jalen Reed even had some parts where he was contributing this year. I gave it a B plus last year whenever we first reflected on this draft. You gave it a B. Bailey, after the 2025-2026 season, how are you feeling about this Texans draft?
I think I'm feeling better about it. Ursary sliding over and starting at left tackle, I think, was pretty surprising. But I mean, he did a pretty good job. I was pretty impressed with the job he did. Obviously, he had some up and downs, but I mean, what left tackle as a rookie doesn't? So I mean, that was pretty impressive by him. Woody Marks, good story. I don't think he was that good. I think he was more like a production guy than an actual like talented running back. So it was good that they got some production out of him, and they were able to kind of mix him in with Chubb as a starter. Jaden Higgins was a nice starter for them also. Like you said, Noel mixed in, and then the Texans defense is another one like the Broncos where there's just kind of too much talent to see a lot of these guys fill in that they took, like John Smith and Jalen Reed. I mean, they did get some snaps, but not starter levels. So I would say I'm probably higher on this draft than I was coming into it. Like if I gave it a B before, I'd probably give it like a B plus on re-review just because of how well, not how well, but how like solid Ursary was at the left tackle position and how good Higgins looked even when Collins went down.
Yeah, I think I'm in a similar boat. I really like Ursary as a long-term piece at left tackle. I feel like we both were pretty critical of the Texans' decision to like abandon their tackle spots, and it felt like they were about to try to just scotch tape their way out of it with Cam Robinson and Trent Brown. But then they added Ursary in the draft, and I like that addition. I think he's a long-term starter. Higgins looks very good. I really liked what I saw out of him. Noel had probably a little bit less impactful of a season as people would have wanted. So maybe a little bit disappointing on that end, but I do think that he can be the slot going forward. Obviously, Nico Collins is the number one guy there, so neither guy has like too much pressure to perform. I agree with you on Woody Marks. I think he's fine. I don't think he's like a bad back, but I think when we've seen guys like Algier kind of just like get replaced because it's like there's better running backs, and even though he put up like 1,000 yards, it's sort of just like not as good as we could get out of someone else. I feel like the Texans are probably heading in a similar path. I think when we go into this draft, I don't think they're going to be a team that's pursuing like Jeremiah Love. I think he'll be off the board well before their pick. But it wouldn't shock me if in round 2 we're looking at this team to select someone like a Jadarian Price or someone else to where Woody Marks kind of takes more of a backseat like he was initially intended to do. The Joe Mixon injury and Nick Chubb being older obviously hurt this Texans team a little bit with their backfield attack, but Marks was able to step in. And I think he can continue to be a contributing piece, but I don't think he's necessarily the long-term answer at running back. Overall, I think the Texans team is going to come down to C.J. Stroud, obviously, so they have to invest more in this offense, and I think that's going to continue to be on the offensive line, adding pieces at both guard spots probably and seeing if you can get better play, maybe upgrading at tight end to where C.J. Stroud has another weapon. Trying to build his confidence up, especially after such a bad end to the season. But ultimately, I do like the picks that they made. I think Higgins and Ursary are long-term starters. I like Noel enough to where I'm willing to see it out further. So I stay in that kind of B plus B range. I think I'll give them a B plus just because I do think that not having a first-round pick and being able to continue to make impact picks is pretty impressive here.
Yeah, not the helmet scout, but the Woody Mark situation kind of feels like the Dameon Pierce kind of situation where he looked good as a rookie, but I mean he's not really that good. It's more of a situation, right place, right time than a talent standpoint. So obviously they expected that Mixon would be the starter, and he was out for whatever reason the injury kind of lingered. So Yeah, I definitely expect him to add a running back either through the draft or through free agency. But like you said, Texans no first round pick, and you come away with this draft. I think they're ecstatic about this.
It's a pretty good class, and team maybe not as excited about their draft is the Indianapolis Colts inside that same division. They went into this draft with a lot of questions, and they added Tyler Warren. They obviously got quarterback play out of Daniel Jones until the injury happened. Other picks in this draft: JT Tuimoloau, Justin Wally, Jalen Travis. A lot of these guys we didn't necessarily get to see a lot on the field, but at the time we still were okay with this draft. You gave it a C, I gave it a B. 1 year later, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the Tyler Warren was kind of the crown jewel of this class. Going into this draft, we're like, okay, the Colts need a tight end, but they're not going to draft one. They never draft for need. They're going to go do and take somebody random, probably another edge rusher. But I mean, they took Tyler Warren. And it's like, oh, okay, and he was as advertised. I think what he showed on the field was what we were expecting of him. Maybe a little less production than we would have liked, but so many people emerged on that Colts offense that too many mouths to feed situation. He definitely carved out a giant role for himself out of that, and he looked good. He opened up the entire offense. Justin Wally tore his ACL in preseason, I believe. So didn't get to see a lot of him, and JTT. I mean, even at the time, this is kind of like a weird pick, and he didn't get to see a lot of time either, just because of the situation of their edge room. I think that the kind of the sleeper here is Jalen Travis, who after Braden Smith went down, Jalen Travis stepped in and he looked good, and it might give the Colts some confidence to walk away from Braden Smith this offseason, thinking that, okay, maybe Jalen Travis can step into that tackle spot. And this Colts offensive line has gone through so much transformation, and they're still managing to pull guys in to start from. It's pretty impressive. So, but, overall, what did I give it before? C? I'm probably still at a C. This is probably still an average draft. I think all the players played it about the level I expected them at. So, I mean, nobody really stood out. Nobody really kind of tumbled. Obviously, not seeing Wally was a bit disappointed. So, yeah, I'll stay firm at a C.
Yeah, I think this was a situation where the roster was kind of just quarterback dependent. So they weren't going to draft one because they added Daniel Jones, and they obviously had Anthony Richardson that they were going to wait and see on. Jones ended up prevailing and looking pretty good. I think JTT is similar to Matthew Golden, right? It's like there's a lot of solid talent in the Colts edge room, but they didn't necessarily have like that top guy. And they added someone in the draft, but the production and overall profile wasn't necessarily like this is going to be someone who can be your alpha edge rusher. And as a result, he's kind of meshed into what was an already kind of crowded room and didn't really find a lot of time on the field. He played a limited role. I assume he is going to see that role expand as he gets more experience in the NFL. And he looked okay. I want to see more out of him for sure, but I wasn't necessarily like deterred by the play that we saw from him. Just definitely needs more production if he's going to continue to make that impact. But was always more of a run defending edge rusher anyway. Warren's great. I think he's a really good piece for this offense. Alec Pierce looked pretty good this season, so I assume he'll be back. And I'm curious to see what happens for this Colts offense because I think Pittman might be the odd man out if they do bring Pierce back, and if they decide to let Pierce walk, then it could be Warren who becomes that number one guy that is just the go-to piece and maybe a really cherished piece in like the fantasy community because of the type of volume that we could expect to see from him. So Tyler Warren is going to be a name to watch. Justin Wally obviously got hurt. Giddens wasn't really ever going to see a large role working behind Jonathan Taylor. But I didn't necessarily feel like any of these picks were bad. It's just a lot of guys that maybe were working in pretty suboptimal roles, or at least opportunities for volume, to where we never really get a lot of answers on them. So probably drop it down to like a B minus, but it's not necessarily like a bad draft just because I think the Colts have a pretty good roster as it is. And a lot of the questions were just going to come down to quarterback, which I understood why they didn't assess that in this draft.
Yeah, I mean the JTT pick it's just like it's the Colts. I don't know, trolling, I guess. Like kind of comped it to the Matthew Golden pick, but I think at least with Golden, you saw that he had the profile and he had the potential to be like a starter, a wide receiver one. And I don't think JTT really ever had that profile. Like at best, he's probably like an edge two, and he's probably like a rotation guy. And Wally was somebody that I think they climbed up the consensus board a bit to take. He wasn't like a consensus third rounder, so. I mean, he kind of got saved, I guess you can say, by the ACL tear, but I don't know how much he would have played in the first place and how good he would have looked. So, Yeah, I mean, I can't hate the Colts draft, but it's really going to depend on Tyler Warren and his kind of his role in the future of this offense.
Yeah, and we're sticking with the AFC South as we go to the Jacksonville Jaguars, a team that went into the draft very aggressive, traded up to get Travis Hunter. The pick looked solid. I mean, there's some flashes for Hunter, but the injury obviously ended his season early. The other selections in this draft were pretty intriguing as well. They took a very unique approach with Wyatt Millum, Caleb Ransaw, Jack Kaiser, Bayshall Tootin, Rayon Lane, and Jalen McLeod. There's some other picks, but overall, this draft is probably one of the more unique as we left that draft. There was a lot of talk about like the versatility that they took with their prospects and guys that can maybe plug in all around the field, especially Travis Hunter on both sides of the football. At the time, you gave it a C plus. I gave it a B. Do you think this draft is paying off, or do you think it's one that's maybe a little disappointing?
I mean, it's impossible to not be disappointed just because of the Travis Hunter injury. I felt like he's really coming into his own in Jacksonville, and then we kind of got it taken away from us. And then there are other picks. I mean, the running backs, filled in nicely. Monaheim did a couple spot starts, I believe, at the center position, and they didn't get a ton of production out of this draft, but they didn't have a ton of picks to begin with. So, I mean, I don't think Milam saw the field, or if he did, he saw very limited snaps. So, I mean, all of this entire draft, especially when you trade that first rounder, relies on Travis Hunter, and I think Travis Hunter looked really good. I thought he looked like he was worth the trade up in the second overall pick, and making the playoffs, and obviously makes this thing of losing that first round pick hurt a little less. And I still do think they're like happy with the pick. Like I said with the Matthew Golden pick when we were talking about it, if the Packers could go back, they change it. But if the Jags could go back, I think they still take Hunter. I think they still do that trade up. So yeah, I'll stay firm to my kind of my initial draft grade of a C plus here.
Yeah, this is a weird situation now because Parker Washington looked really good, and I don't think Parker Washington was getting enough credit prior to the draft, as what was a pretty good start to his career as a slot receiver, and then Jacoby Myers that comes in, and you assume Brian Thomas is going to be there and around in Jacksonville. So it's a weird situation now where Travis Hunter might be forced more into staying at cornerback, and there's less relevance for him in that offense to be a wide receiver, to where I don't know if it's worth it. I do think that Travis Hunter is a great cornerback, but I don't know if he's a great enough cornerback alone to trade up and provide like an extra first just to move up from 3 to 2. And obviously, if he's like a great player, I feel like the Jags are okay with it because they're a very good team and they got an opportunity to trade up and get into that like blue chip guy that they felt was the top of their board. But I think Hunter's main appeal was, this is a guy that can probably provide around like 600 to 800 yards as a receiver while also being like a very good cornerback or even great one for you, to where you're getting really nice contributions on both sides of the football. Now it's like, okay, this is probably a guy who's like our wide receiver 4. Not that Hunter is wide receiver 4 on talent alone, but just usage wise, like you're dropping him down a lot, and you're probably still dropping him down a little bit as a cornerback, rotating him out a good hefty amount, to where it almost feels like not a misfire. I still think Hunter's like such a great talent, and he showed that this season, but it's just like I don't know if that type of player is worth number 2 if he's constantly rotating out with both positions. If he was a guy that was like playing 80% of snaps at corner and then like rotating in for even like 33% of snaps at wide receiver, you're feeling pretty good about it. But if he's the guy who's maybe giving you like 60% of snaps at corner and then is playing like 20% of snaps at receiver, it starts to become a lot less appealing, and you're starting to ask yourself if he's going to have the time to get in rhythm and make enough of an impact to be worth the capital that was required for him. Obviously, I trust Liam Cohen. I still think Travis Hunter has a lot of great talent as a wide receiver and as a cornerback from my evaluation of him. So I think there's definitely opportunity for Hunter to make this a worthwhile decision, but the price that they paid adds a lot of risk onto this. And with how it sounded like they talked about him after the injury and moving forward, I do have my concerns for what he's going to be in the NFL to make it worth the capital that was spent on him. Looking back on this class, obviously Tootin is a great running back, and I think he's probably going to be a starter in Jacksonville next year. Sounds like ETN is bound to hit the market and probably get paid more elsewhere. So I think this running back room opens up. I do think they'll add another rookie, but it's going to be an interesting running back room. And I think Cone loved Tootin. He consistently tried to trot him out there, almost kind of like forced him to become the Bucky Irving. And I think he's probably not as good as Bucky, but he's still a very good runner. And I'm excited to see what he can do for this team. The rest was a little disappointing. I thought Ransaw was a really intriguing pick. Such an athlete, really intriguing safety cornerback versatility to move around the field, kind of plug and play as you need him. And it just didn't really happen for him. I think there's still potential, but it felt like he was a lot more lost. I think Antonio Johnson kind of took up most of the snaps that he was kind of going for. So I don't know. I'm probably lower on this class in hindsight after 1 year of play, but it's something that could easily rise up again if Hunter really kind of establishes himself as a superstar, which is what the centerpiece of this class is.
Yeah, like you said, that's actually a pretty good point about Hunter's future at the wide receiver spot, where you have Parker Washington, you have Jacoby Myers, who they just extended, and Brian Thomas Jr. ahead of them. Brian Thomas Jr., I think, might be a question mark there. I'm not sure how long he is for Jacksonville if he continues to have the season that he had this year, where just a lot of drops, not a lot of focus, not a lot of effort. So I think there is a path of playing time there. And Parker Washington's like a good slot guy, but you'll rotate him out. You'll rotate out Jacoby Myers, who's kind of getting up there in age too. So I don't think there are snaps for him to take, but you are right that this might be more of a cornerback outlook for Travis Hunter compared to the wide receiver, where we thought he was going to kind of do both. But yeah, we'll see. It's a bit unfortunate for Hunter that the entire team just seemed to get better around him, and they filled the holes that he would have filled. So yeah, a little bit unfortunate for Hunter there, and kind of reevaluating this draft through that lens. I do agree with you that maybe this pick will not age as well as good as the talent that Travis Hunter is.
Leaving the AFC South and heading out west to Kansas City, the Kansas City Chiefs, one of the more disappointing seasons this year. Obviously, a team that was consistently in the Super Bowl contenders. Watching from the outside of the playoff bracket this year, they went into this draft with a lot of intrigue, and they came away with Josh Simmons, Omar Norman-Lott, Noel Williams, Ashton Gelati, Jalen Royals, Jeffrey Bassa, and Brashard Smith. Bailey, this is a class that we were extremely high on. You gave it an A+. I gave it an A. Now that we are reflecting on those picks, do you think these rookies disappointed, or do you think it was more issues with the existing roster?
I mean, it's so hard, this draft class, because, Simmons got injured, Norman Lott gets injured. But, overall, I can't give this – I'm going to have to knock it down just because of just production and the kind of guys that I thought would break out more, like Brashard Smith and Jalen Royals. I thought would have a way bigger role on the offense than they ended up having. Gelati and Noel looked good in their limited roles, but maybe expected them to produce a little bit more. And then just from a pure production standpoint, I do feel like I have to knock it down. But from kind of like a tape perspective, when you watch them play, Josh Simmons does look like the left tackle of the future there, and that was the biggest hole on the Chiefs. So hopefully when he's back and healthy next year, this draft will kind of start coming together, and Lott hopefully recovers from the ACL tear and starts putting it together, and Royals has a more defined role in the offense. The Chiefs' offense famously pretty hard to learn, and Royals coming from kind of a lower end school, and he has that injury history too, so maybe he didn't get the full exposure that he needed to the playbook. So I think I'm still pretty high on this class, but I probably have to drop it down from an A+ to an A- just because it didn't have that year one production that I think I expected out of them.
Yeah, I think the biggest disappointment for me is probably Ashton Gelati in this class. I thought he was a lot more pro ready, and I think this year he showed some decent flashes. Like he put together like a solid like box score campaign, and he puts together some solid production. But I think there was just a lot of inconsistency with this tape to where he was giving up a lot of assignments, not setting the edge as well as I thought that he was capable of, and so it resulted in sort of a inconsistent year, especially for the Chiefs, where their edge rushing department is definitely needing someone to kind of step up. And now Gelati might get moved down to more of like an edge 4 situation, because I think the Chiefs are going to head into this draft with the priority of adding someone off of the defensive end spot. So it'll be interesting to see what happens for him. He's still young and he's still got time to grow, but he was coming in with a more pro-ready view in my eyes, and now I feel like he kind of underwhelmed. I do think Noel Williams is a long-term piece for this cornerback room. I think just they seem to consistently hit on cornerbacks, and I think Williams looked pretty solid. And I like Simmons a lot. I still am very high on Simmons watching him back. Obviously had some missed time due to injury and whatever off-field stuff was happening. But as he comes back and as he gets more experience in the NFL, I think he's going to be a long-term answer at offensive tackle. I like this class still. I still think that there's a lot of contributing pieces in this draft class that will age well as we continue to look back at it. But after 1 year, I think, like you said, it'd be almost impossible not to knock it down a little bit. So I'm going to go to a B plus. But ultimately, I think when we look at this draft more like 5 years down the line, we'll be saying the Chiefs still had one of the better draft classes. And now we're going to move forward. Another team in the AFC West, the Los Angeles Chargers. They started out this draft with Amarion Hampton and Trey Harris. They also added Jamari Caldwell, Kyle Kennard, Aronde Gadsden, Keandre Lambert-Smith. This is an intriguing class and a fun class because there's a lot of skill players and a lot of guys that we actually got to see kind of take the field this season. 1 year later, after our grades where you gave them a B plus and I did as well, how are you feeling about this class?
I think I'm feeling pretty good about it. Gadsden, obviously, that huge gem in the late round, took the tight end starting job and kind of ran with it. He looked awesome. Hampton kind of missed too much time, I think, to properly evaluate him. And when he came back, they're like, yeah, we're good with this guy in a split backfield, which I kind of was bewildered at. I can't believe that they're okay with that. You spent a first-round pick on a running back, kind of needing to have that lead back role to get the value out of the pick. Trey Harris, I think, was somebody that I thought would see the field more. He was on the field a lot, but I mean, there's just too much talent in front of him, I think, for him to really consistently get that playing time. But I thought he looked good. Caldwell looked good in the rotational role. RJ Mickens as a rotational guy I thought was good, and then Keandre Lambert-Smith saw the field some too. This is a good draft class. A lot of contributors here. I think the Chargers are really pleased with this draft class. To kind of transform the offense into being a little bit more modern, and they bring in Mike McDaniel to also further that. I think this will be a great building block draft class. Maybe not the year one production that I expected out of them, but I mean, I still think this is a pretty good class for them.
Yeah, I'm sticking with a B plus with my grade because I think the players they added were pretty good. I think Hampton will be a very, very good running back. The injury sucked, but I think when he was getting a full workload and kind of running with it, he showed a lot. I am curious to see how he fits into that Mike McDaniel offense because I think McDaniel obviously kind of likes the more finesse backs, and Hampton's definitely someone that has a little bit more of a bruiser mentality. So it'll be interesting to see how they mold together and how they shape up their offense around that. Trey Harris is a guy that I think is a long-term stud. I am begging the Chargers to just unleash him, stop trotting out like Keenan Allen, who I think Keenan Allen's good, but I think Keenan Allen was kind of taking up snaps from your younger players that you needed to kind of see develop for the long-term outlook for this team. I think the big knock on this draft isn't necessarily who they drafted, but some of the positions that they didn't draft. Center, I think, was one that a lot of fans felt Bozeman was not a good center, and it came back to haunt them in time. But, Harbaugh kind of has his loyalties to his guys, and Bozeman kind of fell under that umbrella. The interior offensive line fell apart. The tackles fell apart due to injuries. I'm not going to bash them for not going and getting a tackle when they had Slater and all heading into the year. But they probably need to address the interior offensive line more, get some versatility, some depth, and it would have helped this team kind of stay more upright, help Justin Herbert continue to gain that momentum when early in the season, the Chargers looked like a team, especially now that we've seen how the year played out, this was a team that very easily could have been the best team in the AFC and very easily could have been playing in the Super Bowl this coming Sunday. And I know you can say that about a lot of teams if they stayed healthy or whatever, but the Chargers looked really good at the beginning of the year when their offensive line was cooking. And you saw the type of trench control that they had, getting guys like Caldwell with Minter operating that defense. Now you lose Minter. The defense is obviously probably going to have a small regression, even if Christian Leary is very good as a defense coordinator. And you kind of have to rebuild Herbert another offseason saying, hey, you're very good. We believe in you. Obviously, we think you're a stud. We need to get you your protection. And, that's tough to continue to sell to your quarterback. I mean, sometimes it can be fine, but sometimes, we saw it with Trevor Lawrence, where if you continue to have those play and this cold season performances, it can really kind of add on to a quarterback's mental and take a while to kind of really bounce back fully. And I worry about Herbert being a victim of that, where he really kind of has great play and he looks good to start the year, and then he kind of loses that momentum later on as the team kind of gets banged up and the offensive line falls apart. So the Chargers need to do a better job of keeping him upright, keeping him protected, because I do think Herbert is a top 5 quarterback in this league. It's just now, can you protect him for the entire year to where he can capitalize on the opportunities in the postseason?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the biggest knock against this class will end up being Hampton if Hampton doesn't kind of distance himself from whatever split backfield decision the Chargers are going to do and become that lead back. Because I mean, you're right. When you look at the holes on that team, Hampton's a great player, but would they have been better off taking like an Ursary, maybe like a Donovan Jackson, fill in that interior offensive line role, and then kind of scrounge around for some running backs in free agency? I mean, it's almost undoubtedly true that the Hampton pick isn't that great in hindsight. They kind of got similar production when he was out versus when he was in. It wasn't that much of a difference. So they would have been, I think, happier with some offensive line pieces. And this is already year one of Hampton on a rookie running with a running back, especially on that rookie contract. Year one is important. Every year you burn is just like terrible. You have to really maximize the amount of years you get them for cheap before they start to get expensive and start to become a little bit less worth it when you start coming with the positional value argument. So, yeah, I think that is the biggest knock against the class. So I was at a B plus before. I think I'll knock it down to a B just because of Hampton and the holes that they have on their roster.
Fair enough. And sticking around in LA, but heading to the NFC, we're going to talk about the Los Angeles Rams, a team that fell just short of the Super Bowl this past conference championship round. They started out this draft with Terrence Ferguson, added Josiah Stewart, Jarquez Hunter, Chris Paul, Ty Hamilton, and Kanata Mumfield. Very interesting draft, one that we weren't very high on. We both gave it a D. Obviously, they didn't have a first-round pick. They were kind of lacking the overall draft capital in full with just 6 players added in this class. 1 year later, we've seen Ferguson play a little bit, show some flashes, but how are you feeling about this Rams draft haul?
I mean, not that great. I mean, Ferguson couldn't really push for playing time like I think maybe the Rams expected him to. When he was on the field, he was making catches, just huge catches. Like his yards per reception was massive, and Josiah Stewart probably played more than they wanted him to play. He was on the field a lot. But I mean, this is still a pretty bad draft from the Rams. And when they were so close to the Super Bowl, and you kind of look at the issues that you knew they had on the roster going to the season, especially at corner, it's kind of hard to kind of look back at this class and not kind of just sigh or kind of like facepalm when they could have just probably stayed and picked. And then the Falcons, the value they got from the trade back from the Falcons was undoubtedly worth it. But when you're the Rams and who knows how many more years you have with Stafford perform this level, you have to be aggressive. So maybe you just ignore the trade back, you make a pick, you trade the pick maybe to get like a solid offensive guy, maybe defensive guy, something else to help push this team into like unstoppable range. They clearly like their roster a lot going into this draft, which is why they're so comfortable with the trade back. But I think the Seahawks kind of expose the issues that they do have. So, I mean, I gave it a D before this draft. This is probably still a D, maybe a D minus, just because of the missed opportunity they had from this draft to probably make one of the final Super Bowl runs that they'll be able to with this core.
Yeah, I think this class is going to be one that I always look back on and just think how 46 felt kind of wasted. I feel like Colby Parkinson really kind of stepped into his own this season for the Rams to where tight end isn't as big a need. And cornerback was a big issue. And I know a lot of times when people look back on drafts, they'll look at these classes and it's just kind of like what names are closest on the Wikipedia to where you consider who they could have drafted. But Trey Amos is probably the guy that I'm always going to connect to this draft class because if they took him at 46, they probably solve a lot of the cornerback issues this season. And they look a lot better heading into this year. The size, physicality, and boundary play that he provided for even the Commanders who were having a down year, I think it would have solved a lot of the Rams' issues in the secondary. And I know that McVay is one of the top coaches in the NFL. I think he's amazing. But I think his biggest weakness is the fact that he has his guys and he commits to them so heavily. So when he connects with like Jacoby Durant and Emmanuel Forbes, he's like, oh, we're fine. We'll just trade for like Roger McCreary and then we'll be good. And we're set on the boundary. And you aren't. You are not set. And it's fine enough for the season. You know, you have an offense that's putting up great points every single week, so you're not really that concerned about it. But then once you get into these grudge matches with the Seahawks where you have to hold a JSN in check, you need a guy like Amos who has the size, physicality, and just ability to take away at least like a third of the field to where you feel a lot more comfortable with the rest of your defense and you make the job easier on other guys. So yeah, it's really just about who they didn't pick. Ferguson is someone that I think can be solid, but I don't really love the upside. I wasn't as high on him as some people were, especially when the Rams decided to pick him, because a lot of people were thinking, holy cow, this is McVay's guy. This is going to be like a Puka tight end version. It didn't happen. I'm sticking with the D. I could be talked into lower. I think this is just kind of a stinker of a draft class, and McVay will overcome it. He'll be fine. He'll have his guys, but too many of these stack up and you run into real issues with your roster. And we saw it happen with the 49ers, and I think that's something that the Rams should be concerned about here if they're going to continue to burn picks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't even think like Terrence Ferguson is a pick burning per se. I do think he showed a lot of potential. I think he is going to be a pretty good player for them, but like you said, just the missed opportunity that they have, they'll definitely be kicking themselves after this draft. And this is not even like a hindsight thing where it's just like, oh, obviously they should have taken a corner with their cornerback room. This was known issues on their defense, known issues on the roster, and they just chose not to address it. And I mean, they were one of the best teams in the league, and they were probably had a deserved, right to be a little bit cocky, but it definitely backfired on them here. So, yeah, just a missed opportunity for sure.
And now we move forward to the Las Vegas Raiders, who started out this draft by adding Ashton Genty in the first round. They got Jack Besh in the second, added other pieces like Charles Grant, Caleb Rogers, Darian Porter, Tonka Hemingway, Dante Thornton, Cam Miller, Tommy Millott, JJ Pegues. This is a class that there was a lot of draft picks here. The season obviously ended up disappointing. Pete Carroll already gone after one season. Geno Smith project kind of failed. Ashton Genty struggled to get going a little bit with the offensive line in front of him, but I think he showed enough flash. At the time, we were pretty high on this class. We gave it a B plus. Are you still feeling B plus range, or are you dropping it a little bit?
I think I have to drop it a little bit. Genty is so good, but I don't know. I feel like I don't blame the Raiders for this because we also overrated the roster a lot, but you can't take a running back and then finish with the worst record in the league in the first round. That's just a misfired at epic proportions. And I mean, I don't even blame them at the time for making the pick, but when we're looking back with this hindsight, it's just a bad pick at this point. Like I said with Hampton, that year one is so important for maximizing your rookie contract value, especially when you're like the sixth overall pick. You have to really, really kind of hit the ground running. And Genty, which is not his fault. He was good. He was an amazing player behind the line. He's getting hit behind the line constantly. He was grinding out yards, a lot of missed tackles, but it's just not the value that they're looking for. And when you look at somebody, even a pick player like Membu, the Raiders I think would have been a lot happier if they made that pick. Their wide receivers were so disappointing. Besh and Thornton just didn't really do anything. Caleb Rogers I thought was pretty good, starting guard for them. Charles is as like an offensive tackle depth, and then Darian Porter, they gave a lot of snaps to. He was pretty raw, I think, coming out of college, and he, didn't play that well, but he's somebody that you need to give snaps to if you want to develop him to a solid corner. So I think he's a future starter there. I was pretty happy with him, and then Tonka Hemingway somehow had like 4 or 5 sacks this year, despite barely playing. So I mean, I gave it a B plus. Looking back, I'm gonna have to drop this probably down to like a C plus or a B minus. I do think Genty will still be good, but I think this is just such a backfire of a class when you look back on the Raiders season and just what could have been.
Yeah, I thought they plugged up a lot of the roster to where it was going to be a serviceable turnaround, and Pete Carroll was going to get like a 9-8 campaign and maybe sneak into a wild card spot. It definitely didn't go that way, and I think a big part of it is just Geno Smith looked uncomfortable behind that offensive line. Ashton Genty couldn't really get going behind that offensive line. So the issue, I think, is going to start up front, and I think this is a offseason that they're going to head into where they need to address the offensive line and make sure that Mendoza's comfortable back there. I don't know if Colton Miller's going to be around much longer in Las Vegas, but it wouldn't shock me if they try to make it work for another season so that the line is best as possible. But they're going to have to invest some capital in it. I think Genty's a stud. I agree with you that I think the situation was more on the front protection rather than on him. I think it's similar to Bijan Robinson, where as we see that offensive line develop ahead of him, we'll see the talent really kind of showcase. But, if you're the Falcons, are you looking at Bijan Robinson and saying, like, we love that pick? Or are you saying, man, like, we're still in a situation where we're outside of the playoffs and his contract's about to expire, and now we're kind of having our questions. Bijan's a stud, and obviously, if you're quick enough with the rebuild, you're gonna love having Genty for the Raiders. But it's a situation where it's tough to kind of sell it. The Bowers injury obviously hurt this team, especially when you're relying on so many wide receivers that are young. You trade away Jacoby Myers, so it's just like three different rookie receivers that you're counting on, and none of them really kind of step forward. This was a class that I think relied on the idea of pro readiness and instant impact ability. You aren't necessarily looking at a guy like Dante Thornton to be a stud, but you are looking at, okay, he's got the size and speed to contribute some splash deep balls while we rely on Tucker, Myers, and Besh. And Besh didn't really do anything. Thornton didn't really contribute in the role that you were hoping for. It's just, I do think there was a lot of misfires in this class. I think Genty's good. I think there's still hope for guys like Grant and Rodgers to kind of develop and get a spot on the offensive line. I do like Porter enough to kind of give him another year as a starting corner, but there's a lot of holes on this roster still after a draft class that had a pretty good amount of capital to really kind of fill up and plug in this roster. You had, 5 top 100 picks? You had another additional 2 fourth-round picks. So it's tough to look back 1 year later where there was so much opportunity for young guys to earn and carve out roles. And you're saying like one guy you feel really comfortable as a long-term piece, and everyone else is just kind of like maybe if they get better, but right now you aren't really committing to them. So I think for my grade, I'm joining you down in that range. I think I'm probably doing C+, and I could be talking to a C.
Yeah. This is an unfortunate draft for the Raiders, an unfortunate run out for the season, because there's a version of this Raiders team where they probably make the playoffs and Genty goes off, but it just didn't happen for whatever reasons. It might have been predictable. Maybe this was all House of Cards that we should have seen coming, but I mean, a lot of people were kind of high on this Raiders roster, so I don't blame them for this draft, but just with the power of hindsight, you got to knock it down.
Yeah, and there's no hindsight needed for this next draft. The Miami Dolphins. It was a class that you gave an F grade to. I gave it a C+. I was a little bit higher on it. They got Kenneth Grant, Jonas Savati-Naya, Dante Trader, Jason Marshall, Jordan Phillips, Ollie Gordon, Zeke Biggers, and Quinn Ewers. 1 year later, the Miami Dolphins seem to be falling apart. They were kind of hanging on by a shoelace anyway, and now maybe a rebuild in Miami, a change in era, a change in scenery for the head coach, Mike McDaniel, who heads west. Bailey, how are you feeling about this draft 1 year later?
Vindicated. This was an easy prediction for the Dolphins. It's just I don't know what they're doing, and after this draft, I still don't know what they're doing. This is a disaster draft for the Dolphins. Like and it's not even like these guys didn't play. They got a ton of snaps out of their rookies. They just weren't good. Like Savati-Naya was one of the worst starters in the league. Like he wasn't a scheme fit for what they're trying to do. I don't know. I would love to hear the hindsight and the rationale behind that pick. Kenneth Grant played a ton, but the entire Miami defense kind of took a step back, especially that defensive line. And Cranton, wasn't as good and didn't make as much of a day one impact as I thought. He thought he would, and I thought a lot of people would. I wasn't really that high on Grant to begin with, anyways. And then Jordan Phillips played. He wasn't that great. Jason Marshall played. He wasn't that great. I mean, Ollie Gordon's probably the best pick here. He was pretty nice in the kind of that backup role when he got his chances. It was pretty well, but it's just hard to see redeemable piece of this draft. I was an F before this draft, probably an F minus if it even goes that low after. Just one of the worst drafts I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's not looking great for the Dolphins. I still think Kenneth Grant looks okay. I thought he looked a lot better as the season went along, and I think he's going to be a lot more comfortable as we move forward. Obviously, the circumstances change, though. This isn't necessarily the Baltimore defense with Anthony Weaver. It's more of the Jeff Hafley defense, which I assume will have a lot of overlap with what we saw in Green Bay. I do like Ollie Gordon. I think that was a good pick. I think Quinn Ewers showed enough to be a decent backup. I don't think he's going to get the year as a starter. If he does, it's going to be a situation where they also brought in Malik Willis, and maybe Willis got hurt right away or didn't perform well, so then Ewers stepped in. But I do think that it was good value in 7th round with Ewers. That's kind of it right now. I mean, Savati-Naya just looked really bad. I'm hopeful that he kind of continue to grow and get better, but it was rough, dude. I am usually anti PFF grading, but the fact that his pass rush grade or pass blocking grade is like 14 is really, really telling for how much he struggled this year. The anchor was a question at tackle, but it felt like when he was playing guard, a lot of it like worked out, and it just did not work out this year. So I don't know what's happened to Savati Naya. He needs like cement shoes to maybe hold his ground a little bit better, but there's a lot of work to do there. And especially on a Dolphins O-line that was already having so many question marks heading into the year, adding a guy who almost feels worse is almost impressive, honestly. So interesting draft class, one that I think right now looks pretty bad. Obviously resulted in Chris Greer getting fired, Mike McDaniel eventually getting fired as well. So not off to a great start for this rookie haul. Fresh start in Miami with a new regime coming in, so these guys will all get a second chance to prove themselves. We'll see if it ages better, but I think after 1 year, I'm probably dropping it from a C plus to a D. I'll go D plus. I like Grant enough that I'm willing to buy in, and I think Ollie Gordon will be a good running back. I think Hafley is gonna. I think he's gonna try to get like a Gibbs Monty type thing going. Obviously, Achane's probably gonna get a lot more carries than the split there in Detroit, but I think that type of running back duo can help elevate an offense that is struggling to find an identity, struggling to find long-term pieces, and whoever is under center is going to benefit immensely from having that to rely on.
Do the Dolphins hire an OC? I don't remember. I don't.
Let me look this up real quick.
I believe they did.
No, they haven't yet.
Yeah, okay. I was just wondering who's going to take over that offense. But, like, I mean, I think that the Dolphins regime was pretty clearly on their last legs, and it's probably like, okay, this is our last year anyways. Let's just draft some guys. We'll do whatever we want. But, like, what are you giving the next regime? Like, I think Kenneth Graham playing defensive end, so, like, a nose tackle out of position playing defensive end and like one of the worst guards in the league. What kind of parting gift is this? This is terrible. I'm like, I said the regime was gonna get fired and they got fired for this draft. So, oh my god, such disaster. But whatever. The Dolphins, I don't even know how they're gonna dig themselves out of this hole. Hopefully they can soon. I do like them, so I'm hopeful they can bounce back from this.
Moving forward now, we have the Minnesota Vikings, a team that we both gave C pluses to when we were looking at their draft classes. They added guys like Donovan Jackson in the first round. They also went on to add Ty Felton, Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins, Gavin Bartholomew, and Kobe King. It was a limited draft capital class, but now that we're looking back at it 1 year later, how are you feeling about this class? And do you think it was maybe an upgrade or downgrade from the C plus you gave them initially?
I mean, this draft also panned out, I think, how I expected. It's hard. Like, the Vikings didn't have a ton of picks. Donovan Jackson, I think, was as advertised. What we kind of expected out of him, an above-average guard. Should continue to develop and become, like, improve to a better guard. Ty Felton didn't really do a lot. I think that was kind of expected. I think that was kind of a waste of a third-round pick, especially by the Vikings, who, again, did not have a lot of picks and, a lot of holes on that roster that I think they'll have to address in this offseason. So I didn't love that pick, but I mean, I'm still at a C+. This is pretty much exactly what I expected out of them. I know he doesn't count as a draft pick, but Max Prosmer was terrible. So just want to add that in.
Yeah, it was a unfortunate showing for the Minnesota product. I like the Donovan Jackson pick. I think them investing in Will Freeze and Donovan Jackson was a pretty good sign of, hey, we need to make sure that J.J. McCarthy is comfortable back there. Whether he looked comfortable, that is to be debated. He obviously had a struggle early on in the year, seemed to find his footing a little bit as the year ended, so there's some optimism moving forward. But I think it was the right plan of attack in order to make sure that the young quarterback felt good. Ty Felton didn't really have much this year. I think he had like 3 catches in total. He could be in for a bigger role. I'm not really sure what Jordan Addison's current future is, especially with the recent off-field troubles, so we'll see what happens there. And if Felton is able to step into something with that offense, it was a low pick type of situation. Like, they didn't have a lot of opportunities and dart throws, so I'm not really going to bash on them too much. I think getting a guy like Donovan Jackson hitting on your first round pick is pretty solid. I didn't love the Felton selection. The other picks, they're day 3 selections, so it's not necessarily like anything I'm too harsh on. Maybe like a C for my grade, just because I would have liked to see them get better value out of that third round selection than what we've seen so far. But Jackson's pretty good. And, when you're going into a draft with like one first round pick, two in the first 3 rounds, first 4 rounds even, you aren't really feeling too bad about yourselves if you're still able to get a starting value in that class.
Yeah, I don't think the Vikings, like Donovan Jackson, a different pick's not going to help what the Vikings did next year. He's probably one of the better picks, honestly, in the latter half of the first round. And Ty Felton hopefully can develop into something. But yeah, there's not a lot to say about this Vikings class because of how small it was.
Yeah, but flipping the script, a big class, the New England Patriots are now up, and we're talking about them as probably one of the more entertaining draft classes in terms of just overall rookie impact that we got to see on the field. Will Campbell with the first round pick, Travion Henderson in the second round. They added guys like Jared Wilson and Kyle Williams. Joshua Farmer made his way onto the field a little bit. Craig Woodson is starting at safety. Braden Swinson ended up getting cut, but they have some other special teamers, including Andres Borealis, who's their starting kicker. Bailey, 1 year later, this Patriots class is helping them compete in the Super Bowl next week. How do you feel about this rookie haul?
Yeah, going into the draft, so my post-draft preseason grade, I gave the Patriots an A. I'm probably going to bump that up to an A+. Just so much production from the rookie draft, and they all looked pretty good doing it. I think the biggest surprise was Craig Woodson as that fourth-round pick, taking over for Kyle Duggar after the Patriots kind of surprisingly cut him from the team. He was great, played like 1,000 snaps for them. He was great. Henderson was somebody that I think people were a bit higher on. Obviously, people thought he would take over from Ramondre Stevenson, but Stevenson turned in a pretty solid year, so kind of a good problem to have that Henderson was kind of the backup so much with how good your starter was playing. He had a lot of splash plays, a lot of big gains down the field. He wasn't that great snap to snap. I would like to see some more consistency out of him before he becomes that lead down back, but pretty promising rookie season for him. Kyle Williams was somebody else who had a lot of hype, and the Patriots wide receiver room was pretty crowded. Pretty hard for him to get on the field, but when he did, he was impressive, made some nice catches. I think that he's definitely somebody worth keeping an eye on as he develops into a starter. And then the real talking point is the left side of the Patriots O-line. Will Campbell, somebody who not everybody was sold on as a left tackle, held up pretty well in the regular season at that tackle spot. In the playoffs, he did get exposed a little bit, but I mean, he's going against some really, really good edge rushers, and he'll learn. He's still improving. A move to guard in the future might be necessary, but for now, I think they'll continue to roll him out at tackle. And then Jared Wilson was somebody who was a huge steal from everybody kind of agreed on from the draft community, and it's good to see him play up to that. He was amazing at the guard role. Maybe they'll move Wilson into center, they'll move Campbell into one to guard, and that's how kind of they'll build out that interior offensive line. But yeah, overall, what a fantastic draft by the Patriots. It got some good production out of Joshua Farmer as well and Elijah Ponder. So, I mean, all in all, A+ draft by the Patriots.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting the undrafted free agent ads of Efton Chisholm and Elijah Ponder are both ones that are paying off pretty well to add into this rookie haul. I like Campbell. I agree with you that he had some issues when it came to playing against elite pass rushers, which I mean was something that was of concern. But he definitely held up at left tackle a lot better than some were expecting, including me. I was definitely a doubter of Campbell at left tackle. I was preferring that the team take a guy like Genty and maybe trade back up for a guy like Simmons or something like that. I'm happy with how this has turned out and how the team has played. Big question, I think, going forward is Jared Wilson. I think he struggled at left guard. He had some nice moments, but I think overall he was probably the weak spot on the offensive line. Bradbury's going in free agency, so I could easily see Wilson kind of slotting over in at center, his more natural position. But there's some questions about him going into the future. But as a third-round pick, to establish yourself as an early starter and kind of establish yourself as a very good piece to this offensive line moving forward, I think it's pretty promising. Travion, another guy that I think had some inconsistent moments, but the splash plays were well worth it. I really like Williams. I agree with you that the wide receiver room surprisingly just kind of ended up becoming a lot deeper than a lot of people were expecting. Matt Collins, Mario Douglas, Kayshon Boutte, Stephon Diggs, all definitely had a more established role ahead of him. But Williams had some really nice moments as a deep ball threat. And when Drake May is throwing I think the number was 70%, 80% completion rate on downfield passes over 20 yards this season, which is unheard of and probably regresses a little bit as we move forward. But if he's going to be a guy that's firing away and doing so efficiently, Kyle Williams is going to have to be out there. So I think Williams is in for a very nice second year. And it's going to be exciting to see what he can do and how he can establish a role in this offense. This is a very good rookie class and one that I think just is so impactful. Craig Woodson is probably like the best pick of it all, just being like a really good safety in the fourth round is phenomenal. Borealis looked very good. He had some misses, but overall just a very clutch rookie year as a kicker. Patriots now, I mean, this was a 4-13 team that some people were questioning if they were really going to have the roster to make Drake May comfortable, and instead he's looking like a potential MVP candidate and a potential like superstar quarterback in this league. So they did a great job of hitting on this draft class, and now they have to keep that momentum rolling. But yeah, I'm with you. I think I probably bumped from an A minus probably up to an A. I think the only thing that's holding me back is just like there's so many questions still surrounding a lot of these guys to make that next step, to where if there was a huge regression heading into next year, it wouldn't like shock me. Not like to where they go back to being 4-13 and one of the worst teams in the league, but if they fall facing a tougher schedule and Will Campbell starts to look more like below average and Travion Henderson struggles to get consistent and Kyle Williams doesn't take that next step, this is easily like a team that I could see going into that like 7-10, 8-9 range. So there's still a lot of questions for this team and this rookie draft class as a whole, but really great start. Probably still an A+. I think it'd be unfair not to give them an A+ based on what we've seen, but still some hesitance to declare it like the best class in this draft just yet.
Yeah, the A+ really comes from Will Campbell's ability to stick at the tackle. Like, I think he showed that he could, but I mean, it depends which Will Campbell you're getting. Get regular season Will Campbell or playoff Will Campbell. That's probably what's going to determine the value of this draft looking back.
Yeah, so now moving forward to the New Orleans Saints, they drafted Kelvin Banks, Tyler Shuck, Jonas Sanker, Vernon Broughton, Quincy Riley, Danny Stutzman, Devin Neal, and Fidel Diggs, and Maliki Matayo. This is a class that I think is very intriguing. At the time, you were a little lower on it. You gave them a C-. Bailey, 1 year later, I feel like you got to come up at least a little bit. How are you thinking for the Saints class?
This is a surprising draft. The Saints, I really didn't like what they did, their philosophy coming into this draft, but they surprised me. Banks was a pretty good starter. I mean, he was pretty good at that tackle spot, and if you're the Saints, you're probably thinking you might have something cooking here with Banks and Fuega as your tackles. And Shuck, I think, was the biggest surprise. Somebody who I kind of wrote off as being overrated. He's not really going to be that good in the league, but he was good. He was a really good starter, probably the best rookie QB from a production standpoint. From a tape standpoint, I thought he was a little overrated, honestly. I still have a lot of question marks about Shuck, especially when it comes to his age and his kind of ability outside the pocket. But Jonas Sanker was pretty productive as safety. Quincy Riley turned in a pretty good year. I was at a C-. I'm probably going to pump them up to at least a B-, probably B. I would say B just because Shuck probably can be a bridge quarterback for the Saints, probably maybe even a plus starter out there. And if you can get that in the second round when you still get Banks, who's going to be pretty solid as your left tackle, that's a really, really good draft for the Saints.
Yeah, I really like the class. I initially gave it a B+. I think I'm up to an A- now. I really like Shuck, and I think the confidence and ability to fire the football around, especially in an offense and on a roster where there was so little momentum, it felt like early in the year. There wasn't a lot of people that felt bought in on this team. The energy that he brought to this team and the overall just competitiveness that the Saints showed in that back half of the year is very exciting. I like Devin Neal. I think Shuck can be a long-term piece. I love Kelvin Banks, and I think him and Fuaga are going to be really good tackles for an offensive line that I think they're just going to continue pouring into to help win up front. I'm excited about the team. Sanker obviously looked good. Riley looked good. Stutzman was in more of a learning role, so I think he can step into becoming a bigger, more impactful player at linebacker. So I don't know. I think this is a draft class that it still has questions like that Patriots class where I'm not necessarily declaring it one of the greatest classes in this draft or anything, but it's definitely in contention, which I think gives it to where you have to put it in that A range. This is especially going to come down on Tyler Shuck, but I like what I saw in that first year, and I appreciate the willingness from Kellen Moore to kind of declare his guy who he wants to roll with. Shuck didn't really fit into the mold of the Jalen Hurts that Kellen Moore just found his most success with. So it would have made sense if he was I'm going to go with a Jalen Milroe and try to turn him into Hurts because that's what's worked for me. Instead, he went with his own evaluation, trusted his gut, and I think it looks really good right now. And I'm really excited for the Saints team because I don't know, man. The way that Olave was playing in the back half of that year just opened up this offense, and seeing him have a QB who's willing to fire his way, even if it's not necessarily that Shuck's this amazing quarterback, but he has that willingness and that like ability to gun it to him and trust him to come down with the grab. I mean, we're seeing it a little bit with Seattle. I think Darnold's obviously a very good quarterback, but just being willing to throw it up to JSN and trust him to get open on the route and having that priority to look his way does so much for the Seahawks. And I'm not saying Olave is necessarily up there with Smith and Jigba, but I do think that with that type of usage and that type of trust, we're going to see Olave be very, very good next year. And I think it's going to help the Saints potentially compete for that divisional title.
Yeah, like you said, this is going to come down to Shuck at the end of the day, and like this Saints draft can easily just fall apart, right? If you know you get your tape of Shuck, and is an older starter. I'm at 26, so I don't know how much room there is for development. This might be the peak of his abilities. What you see is what you get here. And Banks is someone that he was good, but he still had his moments where it's kind of like, okay, we still need to fix up those things. That was a problem in college. So this draft could easily blow up in the Saints' face still. But at this time, from what I saw the rookie year, there's nothing but optimism in New Orleans, I think.
Moving forward now to the New York Giants, and with the third pick, they added Abdul Carter. With the 25th pick, they added Jackson Dart. They later on added guys like Darius Alexander, Cam Scatterbo, some other guys like Marcus Bowe and Corey Black, Thomas Fidone. It was an interesting class for the Giants. Obviously, the attention is going to be on the first round picks, especially the quarterback that they grabbed. Bailey, 1 year in, Dart had some nice moments, had some questionable moments, some concerning play. But overall, I feel like it's hard not to be optimistic about this draft for New York.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Dart and Carter to an extent kind of played at the peak of what you can realistically expect from them year one, especially with the Giants roster not being in a great spot overall. And, Darius Alexander gave him some snaps. Like, Bo stepped in a little bit. He was kind of bad. And then Scatterbo looked great. I mean, he was great with the kind of the tandem Tyron Tracy before he went down with injury. Before the draft, I gave him the B+. Post-draft, B+. Kind of feeling the same. I feel like Jackson Dart kind of brings this draft up a lot, kind of saves it a little bit, just because of how well he played. I don't think anybody was expecting him to play this well. Year one, they thought maybe he'd have to sit, maybe kind of learn how to run an NFL system. But he was making some throws, he's making some reads that I didn't expect out of him. So I think the Giants are so pleased with this draft, getting a great QB maybe, and getting a great edge rusher in Abdul Carter.
Yeah, I feel like the Dart Scatterbo tandem really kind of took the world by storm, and people seem to really resonate with the just intensity that those two bring. So there's definitely an energy and sort of a hype that's going to be following the Giants, especially now with John Harbaugh in town as the head coach. Abdul Carter, I think some people were disappointed with him just in terms of just like play strength. And there was a lot of like Twitter clips going around where he just gets like completely flattened. But this is a guy that was moving from linebacker to edge rusher in his final year of college play, was always going to be a little bit of a tweener, lighter edge rusher that came in more of a pass rush specialist to begin. And he's going to continue to develop as he develops his base, gets stronger in his lower half, and learns to become a better run defender, more disciplined pass rusher that sets the edge. So I think this was a good first step for him and a solid first year. And I'm looking forward to see what he can become. I think the big question mark for this draft right now in terms of just like concerns is probably Darius Alexander. I think that's probably the guy who hasn't really met the expectation for him to this point. Really someone that I felt was kind of well-rounded, more pro-ready as a prospect, and came in looking pretty rough around the edges, struggled to really kind of set himself as a run defender, especially when you're playing off of a guy like Dexter Lawrence on the defensive line. It is a little bit concerning, red flags there, but it's nothing that he can't overcome. He did have 3.5 sacks, so there is a little bit of optimism there just from a number standpoint. And I wasn't like watching every Giants snap. It's just from what I noticed when I was watching the Giants. I feel like Alexander struggled. But yeah, I mean, you hit on quarterback. You got a running back that at the very least is going to be a nice contributor to the backfield, even if I think it'd probably be better to add another guy into that rotation to be like a long-term duo there in New York. But this is an exciting team, and I feel like they hit on quarterback, which is what is most important. And I was lower on Dart than a lot of people. I didn't trust the processing. I didn't trust the confidence, and I didn't think he was really going to become a passer in the NFL that was necessary. And there's still questions. Like, I don't think Jackson Dart is fully out of the woods yet. But for what we saw in the rookie season, I think there's a lot of promise there. And I think New York has to feel pretty comfortable moving with him as the face of what the team is going to be for the next few years. And they're going to try to build around him in that sense. So this is a very good draft. Initially, I gave them a B. You gave them a B+. Bailey, how are you feeling right now with your grade?
Yeah, like I said, I'm probably going to keep it at the B+ range. But actually, you know what? Thinking about it after what you said, I have to give them an A-. I think just because of how well Jackson Dart played, and you kind of have confidence that maybe he is a franchise guy. I think I was a bit lower on him, but maybe kind of Dart's rise in play. Matches Carter's a little bit more disappointing in play, so maybe he's in the B plus. But yeah, B plus A minus range for me.
Yeah, I think this was always going to be about Jackson Dart, and I think the fact that Dart looks good right now, I have to bump it up. I'm going to say A minus for now. I am still hesitant on Dart. I think there is still questions about if he can be a consistent game-to-game passer, take care of the football, and make sure to take care of himself in the process when he is working as a runner. I do like Harbaugh. I think there's going to be some exciting plays. I'm a little concerned on what's going to happen with Harbaugh at OC. I can't help but feel like it might be Greg Roman getting the call there in New York. So we'll see what happens with the Giants. But this is an exciting team, and now that Neighbors is back fully healthy, Jackson Dart is going to have pieces to throw to. They have some great draft picks in this class that can also help just bolster this roster and help make the situation a lot easier on him. The questions about Alexander exist, but if you can hit on a premium edge rusher to where he's at least getting like 8 to 10 sacks, and you're getting a franchise quarterback, and you're also adding in some additional contributors like a Marcus Bowe, who I think can be a guard long term, Cam Scatabo, who I think can be a good power back for you. It's a pretty good draft and one that you're very happy with, even looking back at it years down the line. Moving forward now to the New York Jets. And this is a team that we graded. You had an A minus. I had a B. Looking back at the class, they took Armand Membu at pick 7, who's been phenomenal. Mason Taylor at tight end in the second round. Azareye'h Thomas in the third. They added Malachi Moore, Arian Smith, Tyler Barron, Francisco Mainoa. And that was really it for the Jets. But this was a draft where it was pretty clear they were looking to build around getting a quarterback in the future. We don't know if they're going to do that this offseason, especially with the return of Dante Moore. It seems like the quarterback class has sort of taken a hit to where they may be looking at waiting one more year. The season wasn't pretty for New York. I don't think there's any dancing around that. But how are you feeling about this draft class specifically?
Yeah, I mean, this season was kind of one of the worst case scenarios for the Jets. They kind of played some really bad football, and at the end of the draft, they had the second pick in a 1 QB draft, so not that great for them. But just looking at this draft class, kind of in isolation, I thought Membu was awesome. The Jets have to feel really confident that they found their starting left tackle of the future and right tackle of the future. Malachi Moore, kind of a later round pick. He played starter snaps. He kind of got cooked a little bit, but I mean, he was out there. He was playing some defense out there. Maybe not great, but he was definitely out there, and that's somebody that maybe you can, when the rest of the DBs improve, he can improve too as well. And then Mason Taylor was somebody who had a lot of draft hype, and a lot of people were excited about him. I didn't think he was that great, but the entire Jets offense, from a QB perspective, wasn't that good. I'm not expecting him to reduce that much with Brady Cook, but I mean, he looks like the tight end, a startable tight end, and then Arian Smith was just running cardio out there. That was such a wasted pick. I don't know. I these pure speed guys who don't offer anything else, I feel like have such a bad track record in the league, and teams still draft them all the time. So I don't know. And Nazare Thomas, a couple starts, still questioning the speed aspect of his game. Can he really become an NFL corner with that speed? So still question marks there, but I feel like this draft would be looked on a lot higher if they had a QB stepping in the situation that I feel confident about. But, without the QB, they're still kind of stuck in purgatory. But I do like how they set up their roster and they're setting their offense for that 2027 QB. Maybe 2026, maybe they really like Ty Simpson. Maybe they make a trade for like Kyler Murray. Maybe they sign Malik Willis. So I think this is a good situation for a QB to step in from an offense perspective. Their O-line's pretty set. They got some weapons on the offense from a pass catcher perspective. So yeah, pre-draft I gave it an A minus. Post-draft, I'm going to stick with that A minus. I think what the Jets set out to do in this draft, they accomplished. And looking back on it, I feel like they nailed it on the head.
Yeah, I really like Membu. I think Mason Taylor falls into that bucket where it's like the Cole Kmet, the Pat Freiermuth, who like he can turn in good seasons when you're relying on him as a target, but he's also not necessarily going to be someone who's like always going to be your number one guy if he's like in an offense. He's just there to get you the dependable like 600 to 800 yards, turn in being like a safety blanket over the middle, which is good for a young QB, good in helping to establish a safe foundation for whenever you are looking to add that passer under center. I do think they end up with Simpson. I don't know if it's at 2 or at 16 or if it's one of those situations where they like him at 16 and then the rumors just catch too much steam and then he goes at 2. We'll see what happens. But this is about last year's draft, so we won't speculate too much on this year's draft. But for me, I think the big question mark is you tried to really take this draft class to help elevate the roster and feel comfortable with what your next quarterback is going to step into. And I don't really feel like much has changed for the Jets from a year ago to now. I think the offensive line is better, obviously, with Membu there. And I do think Fashanu is a really good left tackle to where you're feeling pretty comfortable about anyone who's behind that line. But I don't know. There was a lack of adding weapons to this team. There's still a lot of questions with the rookies that they added. I feel like Taylor's fine, but he's not necessarily like a difference maker. I don't know. It's just like a lot of guys I don't really think completely clear the bar for me to where I'm like, oh, okay, like this guy is going to be really good and a long-term piece for the team. So I probably stick around B, maybe up to B plus because Membu has just been so phenomenal. Malachi Moore also seems like good value, but overall, I do feel like there's a little bit of like a underwhelming sense to this class that's supposed to be like, we're going to take like a mature approach, not force quarterback. We're going to take our time in making sure this rebuild works. And I don't feel like drafts like this really establish a rebuild. It's just like, okay, no one's like going to get themselves fired from this class, but also like you have to have more hits in order to keep your job. And I don't think this draft is going to be one that does it for anyone.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I feel like the Jets had such a clear plan with this draft, and you may not agree with the philosophy behind how they did it, but I mean, their O line's pretty built out right now in terms of they don't really have any weak spots. Mason Taylor is not going to like jump off the page and be crazy, but he is a dependable target for a tight end for a QB coming in. So I don't know. I still like the approach they took to this draft, and I do feel like a QB might be stepping into a better situation than I think you're giving them credit for. I don't think Aaron Glenn's lasting another year though, so we'll see what they do with the QB situation. But I think I might be giving too much credit or not giving enough credit to the QB play in terms of how much was it actually bad QB play versus how much did the Jets offense just kind of suck. So I think that's going to be something interesting to see play out next year.
I think for me, what my main holdup is it felt like, okay, we need just a couple more pieces to plug into this lineup, and then we're ready to go out and contend. And then they offset that by going and trading Quinn Williams, going and trading Sauce Gardner, who I get are like expensive pieces to where if you don't feel like you're going to be contending, then like maybe you want to get them off the books, open up some cap. But at the same time, like the draft was a little too safe for me to warrant like, okay, now we're having a bad season, let's blow it all up and restart on the defense, where I didn't feel like the offense is like impacted enough to where it's like now you can go into this next draft and say, okay, we fixed the offense, let's go fix our defense. Like this draft, you're probably still looking at adding wide receivers and adding like a running back if you're letting Breece Hall walk, who would probably be in line with like how you're trading off Quinn Williams and Sauce Gardner. So I don't know, there's just still a lot of work to do for this roster to where I question the approach. I felt like it was maybe too safe for this draft. And it's not necessarily that like Mason Taylor's a bad pick. I think Mason Taylor is always going to be like a solid tight end. But I think if you're the Jets and you're saying, okay, you know, we're willing to blow it up if this season doesn't start out that hot, then I'd probably be more willing to also just trade back in that second round, try to accumulate more capital, try to get more dart throws to see if you can get more contributors around the roster, more young guys getting snaps to where you can potentially find more pieces that can at least be like serviceable parts of this roster long term rather than, you know, like a high floor tight end.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that I think the Jets thought they're going to be better this year than they ended up being, and then in kind of midseason they realized, oh no, we kind of suck. We need to tank for picks. But I mean, yeah, maybe, I think maybe you're right. Maybe they were just a bit too high on their own roster and not deserve some more criticism towards genuinely thinking that Justin Fields can do something as a QB. But yeah. Very contentious draft, apparently, the Jets. This is the most we talked about a team so far.
Yeah, so let's just move on. We're going to the Philadelphia Eagles, a team that went into this year reigning champions. And when the draft happened, they really kind of made it look like they were on a path of maybe competing again and repeating as champions. Jahad Campbell with the 31st pick. A lot of people were excited about that one. They also added guys like Andrew McCuba, Ty Robinson, Drew Kendall, Smail Mondon, and Mac McWilliams, as well as Antoine Powell-Ryland, Cameron Williams, Miles Hinton, and Kyle McCord in the 6th round. Bailey, 1 year later, there are some guys in this draft like Kyle McCord who are just no longer on the roster. But this is still a pretty exciting draft class. How are you feeling about it after a season of play?
Yeah, it's hard as a like when I think maybe we're tying too much of the draft class to the team success because the Eagles like season would not have gone any better or worse with any different picks here, unless they're able to draft an offensive coordinator here. So I mean, Jahad Campbell was as good as we expected him to be. He was so good. He slid in for the injured Jacoby Dean, and he was great. Makuba looked good, kind of moving downhill. I still think he was a bit iffy in coverage, which is kind of a pre-draft knock against him. So I don't know. I feel like this is a team that doesn't. I don't have a lot to say about it, just because they really just had two guys start, and they pretty much played at the level that I thought they'd play in. I was expecting maybe some more day three contributions from them that didn't end up happening. So yeah, I mean, I don't have too much to say about this draft besides the fact that Jahad Campbell looked really good.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of this is just going to be letting guys come into their own role on the team and see if they can maybe carve out a role eventually. But right now, it's just going to be sitting behind, learning, and seeing what they become in a couple of years. Guys like Campbell and Makuba, I felt like showed enough to where I am excited about them in the future. But really, a lot of guys that are just kind of sitting and waiting. A lot of healthy scratches, practice squad guys, and guys that really are going to have a little bit of time to wait until they can really get themselves out on the field. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. No idea why my camera turned off. Sorry about that. It'll be interesting to see what happens for them, but it's hard to really bash this class when we knew that this was a roster that a lot of rookies aren't going to have a lot of opportunity to crack into. I still like the picks. I still like the guys that they acquired. Even guys like, I think Cameron Williams started in week 17. He looked pretty decent, or maybe week 18. So there's potential there between Williams and Hinton. I really like the swings that they took later on in the draft. So we'll see what happens, but a lot of it's just, wait and see. So I don't really have any reason to change off of my initial grade of an A-.
Yeah, I kind of went B plus. I was at A minus, but maybe I'll just stick it at A minus. I think this is just the exact expected outcome from this draft that we thought was going to happen. So yeah, not much to say about the Eagles, unfortunately. Unlike the Jets.
Yeah, so let's move over in Pennsylvania and go to the Pittsburgh Steelers, a team that added Derek Harmon, Caleb Johnson, Jack Sawyer, Yaya Black, Will Howard, Dante Kent, and Carson Bruner in this draft. Initially, you gave them a B plus. I gave them B. It's been a little bit of a shaky year for Steelers rookies. How are you feeling about this class?
Another class that really disappointed me. I was really high on these players. I loved Harmon. I loved Caleb Johnson. And both of them I thought were pretty disappointing. Like Caleb Johnson didn't play. He obviously had that one kickoff mishap that was really disappointing. Harmon on the line, not that great. He missed some games, but I thought he was going to flash a lot more and be a lot more solid next to Cam Hayward, and he wasn't. I mean, Yaha Black was really their best rookie, I thought. He was the most impressive to me. He was somebody pretty good on that line and, plugging up the run defense. But besides that, I can't help but be kind of disappointed in this draft.
Yeah, I think if I'm sharing some optimism, I would say that Caleb Johnson could easily be in a situation where we kind of see like a Tank Bigsby year two, where he gets away from an offensive coordinator that maybe has a reputation for being a little bit annoying with his running backs. Arthur Smith, no offense to him, he's like a fine offensive coordinator, but it wouldn't shock me if like Caleb Johnson gets a new offensive coordinator and just looks way different from year one compared to year two, similar to like a Tank Bigsby, where it's just maybe not necessarily he's like this elite running back now, but he's still a very nice contributor and he's able to produce with the opportunity. Derek Harmon had his flashes to where there's still reason to buy into him as a prospect. And, like you said, Yah Black looked pretty solid in his role, and I think that defensive line is very impressive in Pittsburgh, so I'm excited to see what happens there. A lot of questions are going to come into Pittsburgh's future at quarterback. Aaron Rodgers, I would assume, is on the way out, but obviously with McCarthy coming in, maybe they run it back for one more year. But if Rodgers is out, there's going to be talk about maybe running it with Will Howard for a year, seeing what they have in him. Obviously, they probably bring in another veteran to compete with him. But if Will Howard can become a serviceable quarterback or maybe a long-term answer at the position, then this draft grade flies up. But right now, from what we've seen from these rookies, it's a very disappointing class. So I have a B. I'm going to drop it down to a C. I think there's still reason to have some optimism about some of these guys. Obviously, a player like Will Howard's always going to be propped up more than they're actually going to really get the opportunity to show in their rookie year. So I'm not necessarily like bashing them for that selection. It's fine. It's like a day 3 pick. It's just Harmon underwhelmed. Johnson was pretty much a non-contributor at a position that's really kind of hard to justify having non-contribution from. So it's really disappointing start, but I'm not necessarily ruling anyone out from this class.
Yeah, this class is hard for me just because, like you said, I loved Harmon as a player. I thought he was going to be so good, and he was disappointing, but I still have faith in him. But he didn't. He just looked really bad on that line. And Caleb Johnson, you're talking about tank big speed. They took Caleb Johnson the second, right? Was he like the 63rd pick? Is that really like a desirable outcome for a second round running back? Probably not. So I don't know. And I still think the players are good, but like Caleb Johnson is just clearly the third running back right now in that Steelers running back room, and I don't know how many chances he's going to get to move up. The two running backs ahead of him look pretty good, and I mean we're talking about Will Howard. Will Howard will most likely end up being nothing. So pre-draft I gave this a B plus. I still have faith in Harmon and Johnson as players, so I'll knock it down to a B minus. But this could easily be a draft where you look back and they got 0 contributors besides Black out of it.
It's tough. It's a new era in Pittsburgh, so we'll see how they deal with it. But moving forward to a team that really kind of knocked their draft out of the park, we had it pretty highly as well. I gave it an A plus. You gave it an A. The Seattle Seahawks, who selected Gray Zabel, Elijah Arroyo, Nicky Manwari, Jalen Milroe, Robbie Outs, Torrey Horton, Riley Mills, Bryce Cabledew, Ricky White, Mason Richmond, Damian Martinez. Look, the headlines of this class are obviously Gray Zabel and Nicky Manwari, who have been so impactful for this team. Sometimes, it is those low-value positions like strong safety and getting a guy on the interior at guard that can help elevate a roster. The Seahawks obviously did that, and a little bit of help from signing a big-time franchise quarterback at free agency. But, it's hard to really say that this class can be anything but an A. I'm sticking with an A plus. I think what I'm seeing from the guys who are contributing, I'm excited for what I saw from Torrey Horton, who I think will eventually take over Cooper Kupp's role in the offense, is really exciting. And I think Elijah Arroyo can still kind of carve out a role as that tight end too, even though AJ Barner really looks like a very promising tight end for the team.
Yeah, this is a great draft from the Seahawks. Even though maybe Arroyo was kind of a miss. I'm probably lower on his long term upside than you are. I felt like I don't really see a place for him in this offense moving forward. But Horton, like you said, was pretty good. I thought he was like a really nice wide receiver 3, kind of like a under the radar guy before his injury, and that looked like a great pick. And then even Nori, what a find for them. Not really a find, but the aggression to kind of trade up to the top of the second and to take a strong safety is a risky move, and it paid off for them. He's been awesome. He's been awesome in the playoffs. And Gray Zabel, the Seahawks' interior offensive line was so bad, and Zabel is a nice kind of stabilizing piece there. The other two guys still a work in progress, but I mean they got one solved. And when you take a guard in the first round, there's obviously the expectation that as a lower value they need to perform right away, and I thought he did. And like you said, I would probably give this draft an A plus just because of how well these pieces kind of fit in to how the Seahawks run has looked. Like without Gray Zabel and Imanwari, they probably get bounced. They probably aren't the 1 seed and they get bounced in like the wild card round. So it's hard to overstate how important this draft was. Kind of similar to the Patriots to the Seahawks making this Super Bowl run.
Yeah, what's kind of crazy is with hindsight, maybe like the not even like the worst pick, but maybe like the pick that they would redo is just not even swinging on a guy like Jalen Milroe, because you now feel a lot more comfortable about Sam Darnold. You don't really have that risk of like, is it going to work outside of the Kevin O'Connell offense? And you maybe take a guy like Jared Wilson and plug him in at center and just continue to bolster that interior offensive line. But I mean, Seattle just really took this draft and said, look, we aren't going to be prideful about some of our guys that are on the roster. We're just going to add talent. We're going to add guys that we think can, come in and compete. And for a lot of these positions, it worked out. And now they have a very good roster already, and they add in some very exciting young talent. And even if it is just kind of like 2 guys that headline this class, they came in and played at such a high level to where, I mean, I don't think the Seahawks are in the Super Bowl right now without these guys. So yeah, it is huge impacts that they got. Even if it's at low priority positions, they address the needs that were going to have the biggest impact for this roster. And we've seen it play out tremendously for this team. So yeah, I keep it at an A plus. And I'm really loving this draft for the Seattle Seahawks.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me of that Lions draft where they took Gibbs, Campbell, and Branch, and you're like, wow, this is just like completely transforms his team. This is a complete transformative draft. Obviously, Darnold has a lot to do with it, but yeah, I completely forgot about Jalen Milroe. Honestly, he's kind of might be relegated to a backup role. Hopefully, he gets traded to a spot he can actually start. I was a big fan of him in the pre-draft cycle. So
yeah, it was one of those where it felt like maybe if Darnold didn't work out, they'd get to throw Milroe in there. But now I can't see a situation where he really finds himself starting unless something like drastic happens. But moving forward now to another team in the NFC West, the San Francisco 49ers. They started this draft out with Mykel Williams in the first round, then added Alfred Collins, Upton Stout, Nick Martin, Jordan Watkins, CJ West, Marquez Siegel, Jordan James, Junior Burgeon, and Connor Colby, as well as Curtis Rourke. Bailey, this draft was one that was very clearly trench focused. How are you feeling about the San Francisco 49ers defensive line 1 year later?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the thing to mention is how much defensive line players they took, and Mykel Williams tore his ACL, so that was really unfortunate. I really feel like that impacted the entire 49ers draft, where they just couldn't rush the passer anymore, and Mykel Williams clearly supposed to be a very big part of that. Upton Scout was good slot player, like nothing to write home about. Alfred Collins looked okay, but this entire 49ers defensive line I felt like was pretty bad. Got exposed pretty hard in the playoffs and then against certain like really good rushing teams, and I don't know. It's hard to really give a fair grade to this draft without seeing Mykel Williams play a full season, just because of how kind of they built this draft around him. So it's hard to say for me right now.
Yeah, I think the hiring of Saleh by Tennessee is definitely going to hurt this draft class future because, I mean, I don't think that's that deep of a take, but it's just guys like Mykel Williams and Alfred Collins, who you're still kind of hoping continue to make strides and develop into their draft slots and making it well worth it, are now losing what is probably one of the best defensive developers on the defensive line. So this is going to be an interesting situation, see how it plays out. I think the biggest just miss in this class, even though he wasn't necessarily like a high priority pick, CJ West in the 4th round was supposed to be a guy that came in, plugged in immediately as a run stuffer, kind of in that like Poona Ford mold. And he really kind of disappointed as a run stuffer. He didn't have a lot of opportunities where he was like showing that he could be the long-term answer. I think they eventually kind of just pivoted to Kalia Davis on the defensive line. So a lot of answers still to be found on that defensive line. I think that's one of those picks that doesn't age very well because it's just you're missing on sort of these niche holes that you were hoping to fill with those day 3 picks. And I hate to bash on the 49ers, but I don't love their drafting. So now without Saleh, who kind of can come in and be like, oh, let me get this guy so that I can fix this issue, more questions are going to arise. So we'll see what happens for the future in San Francisco. But I think right now I am optimistic about the Collins and the Williams and the Nick Martin situation. So I'm willing to stick around in that B, maybe drop it down to like a B- type situation. But still feeling somewhat promising about this draft class.
Yeah, I was at a B before the draft. I think I'm going to drop it down to a B minus. And I think it's important to say that also Nick Bosa missing the season really impacted how this defensive line played. Obviously, there's a lot less attention on their kind of wide nine edge rushers. So the rest of the defensive line is just going to look worse in comparison, where you don't have to worry about their edge rushers as much, especially with Mykel Williams going down also. So I feel like it's a bit too early to kind of declare this like a disaster by the 49ers. I just think this entire season was one you kind of want to forget, and they had a really good playoff run for considering how injured they were. So I'm still I still have a lot of faith in this draft. It just obviously did not work out the way they planned.
Yeah, and another team that had a year maybe didn't work out as they planned, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers came into the season looking to repeat in the NFC South, eventually lost it to the Carolina Panthers. This draft class was one that I think was more interesting. We graded it somewhat low, giving a C+ on my end and a C- on your end. They got Emeka Egbuka. They obviously added guys like Jacob Parrish, Benjamin Morris, David Walker, Elijah Roberts, and Tez Johnson. I think this is a class I'm a lot higher on as we kind of look at it a year later. I thought wide receiver wasn't as big of a need at the time. Obviously, Godwin was still a lot just injured this year. Mike Evans eventually went down with injury. Egbuka had his moments where he kind of stalled out, but I do think that he showed a lot of promise, and I think he's going to only continue to get better as he gets older. Parrish is someone that I think is one of the top slot defenders already as a rookie. He looked really promising, and I'm very excited for what he can be for his future in Tampa Bay. Benjamin Morris is a guy that I think is the big question mark right now for this team. He was pretty inconsistent, rotating in between McCollum and Jamel Dean on the outside. I think Dean's gone. I think Dean's going to hit the market in free agency, get paid a lot more by someone else. That's how they kind of reworked the contract so that he could hit free agency sooner. So I'm expecting Dean to leave, and Benjamin Morris is going to get a full-time role. If he can step up and prove himself in that role, then this class is probably one that I'm going to be looking back on and very higher on. But right now, I think the Benjamin Morris question mark still leaves me with some caution. So I'm going to give it a B plus, which is still one whole letter grade upgrade.
Yeah, I think I might be a little bit lower on this class than you are. Like, Ibuka did look awesome earlier in the season, but then he kind of tapered off. And I think a lot of the kind of criticism I had towards this draft was towards the use of a wide receiver in the first round. Like, if you're okay letting Mike Evans leave because, you have Ibuka, you're just like solving a problem that you didn't have. I think there's a lot of other issues on this Bucks roster that we saw, like the defense was really not that great to the level where they were able to win, or where they kind of choked away that really weak NFC South, and a lot of that was on the defense. And like you said, Benjamin Morris wasn't that great. I think they were expecting a lot more out of him from the outside corner position, and they didn't really get a lot of other good production. Like Tez Johnson, I think was a really big surprise. He actually had a nice season from the wide receiver role. And how different does this team look if they took somebody other than Egbuka in the first round? Maybe got somebody on the defense that could contribute a little bit at a higher level. And I don't know. The pre-draft I gave a C minus. I'm bumping up to a C plus just because of how good Egbuka looked. I wasn't really expecting him to produce that much with the wide receiver talent ahead of him, but due to injuries, he was able to kind of break through. But I mean, him being good doesn't solve a lot of the Bucks' issues. They're kind of back where they started. It's like, well, if Mike Evans is getting older, and if he gets injured and Godwin gets injured, like he's kind of injury prone too, we still have this other wide receiver talent. But if Godwin gets injured, that's kind of like you're giving him this huge contract. He's going to stay on the roster. Mike Evans is not somebody that can be replaced by Egbuka. Mike Evans obviously one of the best deep threats in the NFL. So I don't know. I still feel like this Bucks team has a lot of problems, and I don't think Egbuka really solves any of them. But he was so good that you can kind of just ignore it and be like, okay, they got Parrish, and maybe Benjamin Morris can turn around when he gets some more snaps. But I'm pretty sure Morris was getting like healthy scratched in the middle of the year, so that's obviously not too promising. So I'll think I'll stick to a C plus. I still have a lot of questions about this draft, and hopefully Buka can build upon that kind of early season breakout and sustain it for a whole year.
Yeah, I think the big thing was edge and linebacker felt like obvious needs for this team, and I think Pearson and Jahad Campbell were guys that were pretty heavily mocked to the Bucks a lot during the draft process. Campbell especially, there was a lot of smoke on him being like who the Bucks were wanting at 19. So it would be interesting to see how those guys would have played in Tampa Bay if they were the pick. Obviously, not having Ibuka would have had different impacts for the offense. So I think it worked out, and maybe that's something that the Bucks are a little bit more aware of. That maybe Godwin wasn't really as healthy as some others were speculating that he would be back for the season. So I think it justifies it, but I can definitely understand being lower on it because of the positions that they failed to address and it coming back to haunt them this season. Moving forward, though, to the who's next? Tennessee Titans. Bailey's team. They obviously grabbed Cam Ward with the first pick. Then they got Olu Oladejo, Kevin Winston, Eligai Manor, Gunnar Helm, Chimere Dike, Jackson Slater, Khalil Mullins, Marcus Harris. This was a draft that the Tennessee Titans knew they had to really kind of hit on quarterback and then try to figure out ways to support him with other selections in this draft. It didn't really work out for the team record, but I think it was a promising year for Cam Ward. Bailey, how are you feeling as a Titans fan looking at this draft class after one full season of play?
Yeah, this draft class is a bit of a weird one. Obviously, I don't think people were expecting the Titans to be as bad this year as they were. I think there's a lot of optimism for them to maybe, claw into that 6 or 7 win bucket, and obviously we didn't end up there. And Cam Ward looked about as good as you would have expected. I think his highlight throws are doing a lot of heavy lifting towards the public opinion. He does have a lot of the same issues he had in college. He's not getting rid of the ball fast enough. He's dropping way too far back in the pocket to kill drives. Like, can't be taking 8-9 yard sacks. You got to try to get back up to the line of scrimmage to recover some of those yards. But the throws he's able to make is just like unmatched in the league. There's like 3 or 4 guys who can make those throws, and you try to build everything around him. And the production wasn't there for Cam Ward, obviously, but I'm pretty sure, like, after Ridley went down, the only producers on the team were all rookies. Some of the rookie wide receivers that you mentioned, and Gardner Helm, all which are day 3 picks. So, he didn't have a lot to work with. And towards the end of the year, he was actually doing really well. And the Titans played a lot of good pass defenses, and Cam Ward looked good. I mean, you looked at some of the the performances he put up against like the Texans and the Seahawks. He held his own. It's better than some of these playoff quarterbacks did against them. So I think this draft is obviously going to just lie and fall with Cam Ward. And as like in terms of a range of outcome for Cam Ward, this is towards more of the positive side than the negative. You can hope you can get him some more wide receivers. You hope you can kind of get a better offensive play caller in them to kind of play to his strengths more. But the Titans didn't really address wide receiver until the day 3, and maybe they're looking at some of the consequences of that. They did take Femi Oladejo, who was, maybe a bit of a reach, and then he got injured and didn't play. Would they have been better off taking Luther Burden? Maybe. Probably. And then Kevin Winston injured. He came back. He was pretty solid. Marcus Harris came in, stepped into cornerback. He was a cornerback 1 for a little bit, honestly. He looked pretty good. But he was getting overwhelmed, obviously, since he's a day 3 pick. And this Titans roster is just so bad that this draft, you just kind of get a lot of production out of players that maybe aren't that great. So, yeah, overall, I'm pretty pleased with this draft, but I kind of wish in hindsight that maybe we helped Cam Ward out a little bit more.
Yeah, I think big thing is probably just like missing the chance on Burden in the second round, and that's still like a projection of what we kind of think Burden could be with bigger volume, more so than like what we saw out of Burden, because Burden looked good, but at the same time he's playing in an offense that features Caleb Williams, who's willing to kind of just throw any pass, and gets guys like Rome Odunze and DJ Moore and Colston Loveland who are going to draw away a lot of coverages that wouldn't really happen for him in Tennessee. He'd get a lot more attention, and maybe the opportunities and volume and production wouldn't really match. But overall, I do like this class. I think Helm, Imanor, DK, all guys that can be pretty solid contributors, even if Helm and like DK are kind of like the tight end 2, wide receiver 4 for this team in the long-term vision. I still think that they are guys that are going to help out this roster as they build it up. I like Kevin Winston. I think he's a long-term starter. Harris, I think, is a guy that can kind of plug in as that cornerback 2 for the long term, maybe as that rotational cornerback 3. Still, this is a guy that I think is going to stick around on the roster, which is pretty good in round 6. And I'm high on Ward. I do believe in him, and I like what the staff is becoming there in Tennessee. I like Saleh. I like Dable. I think this team is going to get a lot better in that very first year. I think we're going to see this team take an immediate jump to where they're kind of in that 7 to 8 win range, and then we'll see what happens after that. But I'm excited to see what happens for them, and I think really it all rests on Cam Ward. But I'm eager enough from the year 1 production to buy into this draft, and there's maybe a lack of like oomph from the rest of the picks. If Imanor is just kind of like this like wide receiver 3 kind of quality guy, and DK is like a wide receiver 4, and you just kind of lack like that second piece in this draft, it does hurt a little bit. But this is clearly a team that has kind of gone to a rebuild with their quarterback solved as they do it. So I trust Ward to become good, and I think that's what matters most. I think there is a little bit of like lackluster appeal with the rest of the class, but still I'm willing to give it a B+ because I believe that there's enough guys who are going to stick around with this team for a long enough time to make an impact and help this class look decent in hindsight.
Yeah, like you said, there's not a lot of oomph, but when your roster is as bad as the Titans, you just need guys who you can kind of rely on to maybe give you 300 to 600 snaps a season and not look terrible. And these guys are like, you're like, oh, maybe Ironman is like a wide receiver 3. We didn't have a wide receiver 3. It's like Van Jefferson is a wide receiver 2. So, I mean, I think this draft is going to depend on how this next draft looks when we look back on it. So like, are we able to get that elite edge guy or wide receiver guy in this draft? Are we able to kind of hit on a second round guy? We're probably going to go like edge, wide receiver, corner in this draft in the first 3 rounds. So are we able to get some maybe more plus stars out of that? And if we kind of fail on that, we don't hit on the picks, and then this draft starts to look a little worse. Where it's like, man, we really just did not help out Cam Ward as much as we should have. So it's kind of hard to grade this draft in terms of the outcome, because so much of it just depends on this draft, and obviously the Titans have a ton of money in free agency. But in isolation, I'm good with a B plus on this draft. Cam Ward looked like a complete bust, which is very that was definitely the range of outcomes for him, just because of how kind of wonky of a play style he has with the deep drop back and the weird throwing motion and the height. So I'm pretty optimistic about this draft. I'm liking a B plus grade for this.
Yeah, and now we move on to the last team on the list, and that's the Washington Commanders, who started off this draft getting Josh Connerly. They got Trey Amos, Jalen Lane, Kane Madrano, and then Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt to wrap it all up. Bailey, this is an intriguing class. There's a lot of name value in this class for such limited picks. You gave it an A, I gave it a B plus. Are you sticking with an A now, 1 year later?
I don't think in the realm of fairness I can. Like, Connerly, I thought would be a little bit of a better player for them. I thought, I was like, man, they can just go best 5 with Connerly and it's gonna be so good. But Connerly was so disappointing. I was appalled by watching him play. Amos was somebody that I feel like a lot of people were high on in the pre-draft process. A lot of people were like, oh, the Commanders got to steal in the second, and he was good. I mean, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt is probably a better story than he's a player. He's a good rotational back, but I don't think he's going to solve anything. And then Jalen Lane was a pretty big disappointment, honestly. And pre-draft I gave him an A. I'm probably going to have to drop him down to a B just because of how bad Connerly looked. And Amos looked good, but then he broke his leg. So I don't know. This Commander season was such a waste. And I mean, we can kind of compare this Washington draft to maybe what the Patriots are going to do next year, where you have this kind of young QB, you have such a good year, and maybe your roster has more cracks in it than you think, and then you kind of draft as if your roster is like, you think your roster is better than it is, and then when it gets revealed that it's not that great, this draft just looks terrible in retrospect. So hopefully the Patriots can avoid that pitfall too, but from the Commanders, yeah, I'm going to have to drop them a full letter grade and go to B, because I still have faith in Connerly and I still like Amos, but, oh man, not a good year for Washington.
Yeah, I'm a little higher on some of the other guys. I think Krosky-Merritt, I'm with you that he's probably more of a rotational back guy that probably serves better if they can add one more guy into that rotation and really rely on it. I don't know if that's going to be Rodriguez or maybe like a rookie in this year's class. It'll be interesting to see, but I don't love that they trade away Brian Robinson. I thought it was a weird situation there. Firing Cliff, hiring a new offensive coordinator. I am excited to see what can happen with that running backs room. I think Krosky-Merritt can remain an impact player, but I do think that they would be better served adding another piece. Jalen Lane obviously wasn't a guy that you can kind of plug in and start as this deep threat, which I think they kind of wanted him to be like the De'Ami Brown replacement. I do think there's potential for that, but I do think right now he's a little more green. So he was a good return guy, good special teams contributions. I think the offensive stuff is still a work in progress, and I'm excited to see what he can become. I loved what I saw of Amos, honestly. I thought he looked really nice. Fits well into that Dan Quinn defense. Good playmaker, good size, good physicality on the outside. He's a long-term starter for me, and I think he's going to be a very good cornerback for them. The big question, though, is that first-round pick in Connerly. And if Connerly can grow into the position, develop, and become a starting piece, then that offensive line really looks pretty scary. But it's not been the greatest first year, so it's going to be an interesting situation of how much patience are they willing to give him? Are they going to try to keep him out at tackle? Are they going to move him around, see if he can maybe move into guard? What's the resolution there? And if they can find one where he can become a very good starter or even like a solid starter, I'm going to remain high on this class. But that first round pick is definitely the question mark here. And it's going to be interesting because it was a Cliff recommendation, and now Cliff is gone. So is Connerly going to remain a key piece that they kind of prioritize in the process, or are they going to say, hey, this is a new regime on the offensive side of the ball, and you need to find just ways you can contribute. You're not going to be someone that we're just going to work around or make sure feels like comfortable and coddled because you were a first-round pick. Like now your job's on the line, or now you're going to have to be open to moving positions. We'll see. Washington is an exciting team. I think they kind of got hurt with injuries, and it really revealed some of the bigger cracks in the roster. But I think this is still a class that I'm comfortable grading pretty highly because I think these guys are going to eventually figure things out and eventually contribute to this team, especially a guy like Amos, who I think is a huge hit in the second round, and I think he's going to be a stud. So maybe not B plus, maybe I drop it down to B, but I still like the class, and I'm still optimistic about some of the other guys continuing to develop to where the rest of the class pretty well ages pretty well, and then we're looking at what 5 total picks, still looking like a pretty good contributing class, which is more than you can ask for.
Yeah, maybe I'm putting the blame of the Commander season too much on this draft class, kind of the inverse of what we're doing with the Seahawks. But I mean, honestly, I thought this was going to be like a Seahawks type draft for the Commanders. I thought they were going to make it back to the playoffs, and like Conley stepped in, boom, gave them exactly what they wanted. Amos stepped in, boom, gave them that outside corner that they really needed, and here's another deep playoff run for them. But maybe the injuries to Jane Daniels is more to contribute to how bad the season went for them than the draft. But I don't know. I was just a bit too high on the Commanders roster myself and thought these were the last 2 holes that they had to plug. So yeah, but I'm with you. I give them a B, so I kind of agree with your analysis there.
Yeah, so let us know in the comment section all your thoughts. I know that people are not going to be entirely agreeing with our assessments of your rookies. So if you feel strongly about it, try to have some respect, try to be nice to us. We can't watch every single snap every single time and know everything about every player on every team, but we try our best and we provide some insight. Hopefully we had enough humility with our own grades that you guys aren't too rude to us in hindsight looking back on it. But yeah, let us know in the comment section your thoughts, maybe your assessment of your own class for your favorite team. Like the comment or like the video, subscribe to the channel. And that's Bailey Kumar. I'm Michael Rockman. And that's the 2-minute drill.